Hi, everybody. Just want to say huge thanks to all the new subscribers to the show on the last few episodes. And if you're new to the show, or if you've even watched a few episodes and you haven't yet subscribed, please hammer that subscribe button below the video. It really helps us a lot, and we've been getting a little bit of a nudge in the algorithm. The high priests and priestesses at YouTube have been showing us some love, thanks to you guys. So, if you're into paleontology, the future of AI, or mass extinction events, and even UFOs, we get into all of that on this podcast. This one was a wild ride. So, without further ado, please enjoy this insanely fascinating conversation with Michael Garfield.
Dude, I've never seen anybody come so prepared like you just did. Scooping. What was that you just scooped into your mouth before we did this?
White vein. Kratom.
White vein.
Yeah.
And plus you got the kratom drink. So you're like fully loaded on kratom.
I live dangerously.
How does that make you feel?
Like I don't need to drink as much coffee.
Really?
Yeah.
So I was telling Egan, when I drink a whole one of these things, I start to feel like really f***ed up. I start to feel like slow and drowsy. I have to drink like maybe 3/4 of that to feel good. Well, good. I mean, to feel alert at least. So you got a super high tolerance for kratom, huh?
I feel like my brain hasn't worked the right way since I was 16, and they used to serve bottomless coffee. I think they probably still do at the International House of Pancakes. And so like at 16, it was the only place we could go to stay up late in Kansas City. And I drank like 27 cups of coffee or something in one night. That's what happens when your teenagers are unsupervised.
Yeah.
You know, so like since then, my biochemistry is just unusual.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's
Who knows? Anyway, here we are.
Yeah. Thanks
This
for
is
coming,
great.
dude.
Absolutely.
I'm excited to talk to you today. You have you're interested in some really weird.
Yeah. Well, we live in weird times, right? We live in strange, like weird in my friend and mentor, Eric Davis, Eric with a K, fantastic author and culture critic. And he likes to say that we live in times of global weirding.
Yeah.
You know, that the like global warming is just like a subcategory of this larger phenomenon that includes things like the breakdown of the boundary between the real and the virtual, and you know the way that like our hyper-connected technological infrastructure has made it so that memes ripple through the population faster than ever. So like we're kind of all on the inside of each other's heads all the time, and so like weirding in that sort of classic British Isles, like WYRD sense, means to twist. It's like to the weirding of something is to twist the outside and the inside together in a way that is like the weaving of one's fate, And so when he talks about global weirding, it's like, well, that's the phenomenon that my friends and I are all kind of principally preoccupied with, is like, what is digital technology? What are psychedelics? What are the, all of these different long-term trends doing in this moment that is dissolving the kind of more conventional categories of inside and outside, of self and other, of, being located in a simple address in space and time versus a more complex address like we live in now, where it's like, well, where are we exactly? Something that happens on the other side of the planet affects us in a way that it didn't before.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that stuff.
Your title is Paleontologist-futurist.
Mm-hmm.
What the f does that mean?
It means I started in paleontology and did that. Like I did it semi-professionally. For my teenage years, I was going out to do dinosaur digs in Wyoming with Robert Bacher, who was one of the principal paleontological consultants for the book and film Jurassic Park, and took me under his wing as a kid and engaged me in a kind of like Socratic learning for years and years. And then right when I was about to get out of school at the University of Kansas and pursue paleontology as a doctoral student, I read a couple of papers on animal communication and the evolution of intelligence and language that got me interested in these like really, really big questions about the history of our planet and what evolution really means and all of this stuff. And these are questions that you can't really pursue through easily through a study of the vertebrate paleontological record. So like it's beautiful to be out in the Badlands and like, digging up stuff that nobody's ever seen. And there's a kind of nature mysticism of like, kind of a meditation on silence and wildness involved in that work that I fell in love with. But then I fell in love with these other questions about the evolution of consciousness and then fell in love with the woman who's now my partner, who still had a couple of years of school left to do. So I got kind of stalled out, decided I didn't want to go to grad school, and that I wanted to figure out I wanted to find a grad school where I could pursue this other stuff. And there just wasn't a place for it, because these kinds of questions in the biological sciences are only addressed through basically like complex systems science, which only very recently actually were there any complex systems grad programs anywhere in the United States or anywhere. Mm-hmm. And so there was nowhere to study it. And everyone was like, don't do this. You will become the bane of any organization that tries to take you on as a grad student, because you're not supposed to be asking big cosmic questions. You're supposed to be, doing these little tiny,
right.
Your grad advisor gives you some tiny piece of their thing. Yeah, it's all very siloed and sort of disciplinary fragmentation everywhere. And so I was like, well, this is dumb. Like I'm in love with these questions. So I guess I just have to go pursue them on my own. And then that leads a person into, like out of thinking about deep time just merely in the past, starting to ask questions about the coevolution of humans and technology and what we're becoming, right? Like, what are we turning into? Mm-hmm. And how is that related to major evolutionary transitions that have happened on the past, on the planet in the past, like the origin of cellular life or multicellularity, or the atmosphere as a kind of artifact that's created through relationships between plants and animal and fungi. And so, all these big questions go through the lens of paleontology, but come out on the other side as kind of practical inquiries into how do we navigate the transformations that our geosphere, biosphere, technosphere are going through right now. What does it mean to be a person living through this stuff?
Yeah.
Those kinds of things. So, yeah.
Do you ever go on any dinosaur digs anymore?
I haven't been on one in 20 years, but
How many dinosaurs have you dug up?
Oh, that's hard to say, because you don't always know that the bones are from the same animal.
Oh, really?
Right.
So you don't always get like a perfectly shaped dinosaur? You just find random sporadic bones?
No, that's gross Hollywood misrepresentation of the actual. You don't just get to sit there with a toothbrush and just like in Jurassic Park, like they're just like, oh, hey, look, there's a whole thing here. It's not like that at all. It's like some sites are like that, and they're very rare in the world. Like the Gobi Desert Mongolian dinosaur quarries are kind of like that, where the whole animal was buried in a sandstorm or whatever, and so you just get this perfect skeleton that's coming out of the sand. But then a lot of places, like the Allosaur quarry that we dug up in Wyoming, was an Allosaurus nest that had been buried in a mudslide, and then over years the gas from the rotting corpses.
What's an Allosaur?
Oh, it's like it's like a kind of an ancestral relative. It's not a direct ancestor, but it's a kind of like a smaller Tyrannosaurus. Okay. They were the ones that were hunting Stegosaurus and Brontosaurus and stuff in the late Jurassic, and so they've got they're really beautiful animals, about 30 feet long. They've got 3 big claws on each hand, and this site, there you go. This site showed the behavior of allosaurs as family creatures with advanced parental caregiving, because you could see the way that the parents were bringing chunks of dinosaurs back to the nest and then letting their kids feed on them. And they actually, Bakker and his crew actually found the the hip bone of an Allosaurus that had been fully penetrated by the spike on the tail of a Stegosaurus. And this animal should have died from its wound, but then was clearly nursed back to health because the wound had gotten septic and you could see an abscess in the bone. But then the animal survived and did not starve to death and healed. And like the inference that you can draw from finding a fossil like that is that its brothers and sisters or its mate or whatever were bringing back food for this animal to eat while it nursed itself to recovery. And so you have this 144 million years ago, you have these really advanced family behaviors that, we've kind of taken for granted as, something that only humans do or something that only mammals do. And it turns out that, dinosaurs loved each other and took care of each other and, helped each other mend broken bones and stuff like this. But that site was totally scattered. Nail quarry at Como Bluff was totally scattered because as the bones rotted in this mud, the bones would turn, and so you would get stuff that was completely jumbled. It was just like a total like Jackson Pollock chaos of bones that, it was like very hard to tell, who died first or what was laying on top of what. And so, sometimes you find sites like that where it's just, if something's buried in a real rapid, sudden flood deposit, it's just chaos. And there's like rocks have been ripped up and deposited on, this stuff is, I hear you talk about Younger Dryas impact stuff on the show. And it's like, it's a similar kind of, you're looking at the taphonomy and the stratigraphy.
What is the, do paleontologists talk about this? Like talk about how the impact affected the Earth and like if there were more than one? I know it was the Chicxulub impact in the Yucatan was the one that took out the dinosaurs. But do people think that there could have been more than one impact? And where can you find the most dinosaur bones?
Oh, well, okay.
Sorry, that was like 5 questions.
So actually I just saw, I can't remember the name of the paper, but somebody just did some work. Oh, it was Jim Kirkland, who is a fabulous American paleontologist who was involved in like the discovery of a bunch of notable species. But he just did a paper on an impact in, I think, Africa at the end of the Jurassic. So it turns out that maybe the Cretaceous period, which is like the heyday of dinosaurs, this like the longest stable period in recent Earth history. Yeah, Kirkland just shared this paper on apparently another meteor impact in South Africa that may have ended the
Morokweng?
The age of Brontosaurus and Stegosaurus. So it may be that the whole age of dinosaurs was kind of, the Permian extinction also had, was mostly about volcanic eruptions and
what extinction?
The end Permian, which is right before the Triassic, which is the period that killed the regime of terrestrial reptiles and the whole like ocean ecosystem that basically cleared the slate and made room for dinosaurs to take over. And the end Permian extinction is the biggest in the history of the planet. It's like 96% of all life on Earth.
Make that big again, Steve. That image. That's not it. That one. So where is that here?
That's not on this chart.
It's not on this.
I mean, if you look, it's about 252 million years ago that there was a.
Okay, so this one only goes to 150 million.
Actually, if you there's a Netflix documentary, Life on Our Planet, that goes into some of the end Permian stuff in detail that you get just like nothing. Like there's almost nothing left over. And we bounce back from that. And it's funny because like there are, they say 5 mass extinctions and we're living through the 6th, but that's based on a kind of what I consider kind of an arbitrary marker. And there are actually in the kind of recent fossil record, there are like 18 enormous extinctions, not like
18.
Yeah, they're not all mass extinctions as far as like, Pluto, like some people don't consider Pluto a planet, but it's like that kind of a boundary. But there are a lot more major extinction episodes in the history of the planet than most people realize. And that only goes over the last few 100 million years. And if you go back even further to even more, before the advent of multicellular, like complex life, then there were major die-outs like the Great Oxygenation Event 2.2 billion years ago.
2.2 billion.
Yeah. So like that's when cyanobacteria, like blue-green algae, figured out how to photosynthesize, and then over a couple 100 million years flooded the atmosphere with oxygen. And at the time, there were no oxygen-friendly microbes on the whole surface of the planet. And so it killed off most of life on the planet back when there was only bacteria. And so then it's so funny because, I was just hearing your conversation with the Snake Brothers, and they were talking about, there's this thing of, disaster events and people hiding underground. And it's so there's this constant theme in extinction events where that's what happened at the end Permian, that's what happened at the end Cretaceous, and that's what happened back at the Great Oxygenation Event was there were these horror story moments where the planet is just being pummeled by acid rain, and plants aren't growing, and you can see a ton of spikes on the Wikipedia. You can see the mass extinctions stick out, but then there's a whole sort of there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on.
Wow.
And some of these are possibly due to
250. Which one is that?
250 is the Permian.
Permian.
Yeah,
right,
that's the big boy right there. But
what do you think that was? You said that was volcanoes?
Yeah, there was a methane bloom that made the atmosphere toxic, and the whole planet was just on fire. It was nasty. But yeah, so the point is that the animals that survive through these kinds of events are burrowing animals. And so even back in the Great Oxygenation Event in the Precambrian, which isn't on this chart,
right.
You've got
Cambrian was 500 million years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's that little, right at the beginning of this chart is the origin of complex multicellular life with eyes and, external carapaces, and, they were modern predator-prey dynamics.
Okay.
Come out around this time. The world stops being just jellyfish and corals. But yeah, so there's this whole repeating motif in the history of life of things getting so bad that the only way that the life on the planet can survive is by either adapting to poisonous atmospheric conditions or by burrowing underground and waiting it out. And so your own gut biome is basically the billionaire bunker dwellers of 2 billion years ago that decided they were going to wait it out underground, and they're still down there waiting it out. They're still the anaerobic bacteria are no longer conquer the surface of the planet, but they're inside all of the little places that they can still hack it out without being poisoned by oxygen.
Right. What is the oldest thing that you found in your digging?
I never dug older than the Triassic.
Okay.
Oh, actually, no, that's not true. Because for a while I grew up in Kansas City, and Kansas City is Ordovician, so it's pre-Mesozoic. It's I think 350, 400 billion years ago. Somebody's going to call me on this because this is not my area, but this is when ancient relatives of starfish. The crinoids were stalked. They look like sea lilies or something. They have a long kind of armored stalk, and then the sea star part of it is up in the water column filter feeding. Oh, really? And so they're all over the Midwest. You go to a road cut in the Midwest and you can pull out these gorgeous crinoid specimens. And those were all down by the Missouri River bluffs by my house. So that's probably the oldest thing. But the oldest thing that I actively dug in Wyoming was Triassic. The Wyoming was part of a Triassic seaway at the time, and so you have ancient squid relatives called belemnites that have these armored cones in the core of their body, like if you've got a parrot and it's eating cuttlefish bone. It's kind of like that, but it was like cone shaped. Yeah, there you go. So these guys are all over certain parts of Wyoming and
Oh, wow.
the Rocky Mountain areas. And they're really interesting, gorgeous. Like there's these fossil deposits where it's just millions and millions of squid butts, as Bakker used to say. And yeah, you just walk around and they're everywhere. It looks like spent bullet casings all over the ground.
That's wild, man.
So yeah, those are really cool. Because you just think about the enormous schools of belemnites and other ancient cephalopods that must have inhabited these waters. And it's bonkers. Like they're just, the amount of biodiversity that has been the norm for our planet over most of its history is just beyond the conception of somebody living in the modern world. Like even 100 years ago in America, the skies were dark with flocks of birds, on a regular basis. And we've, over the course of your life and mine, we've killed off something like half of the songbirds in North America, and half the insects.
Right.
And it's just insane to think of, like, even the amount of biodiversity our parents grew up with is beyond our imagination. But
and it's crazy to think that most likely all these extinction events were cosmic events, coming from somewhere else. They weren't self-induced like right now we are probably maybe the first civilization, maybe not, that actually has the capability and the wherewithal to nuke ourselves off the face of the earth.
Yeah, although like the oxygenation event of 2.2 billion years ago was kind of an interesting counterexample of that. It was like it looks more like industrial pollution now, where it's like this was a successful this was a product of successful manufacturing innovation, right? Like turning air into sugar and then excreting oxygen as a industrial waste in that project. And so, like, when we think about global warming now and the excretion of carbon dioxide through modern fuel burning and manufacturing processes, it's really just sort of the opposite side of this larger cycle of manufacturing innovation. And like, so, I used to host a show called Complexity Podcast, where I talked with Olivia Judson, who is a fantastic British author who's done a lot of work on the history of life as a story of successive waves of innovations to discover new energy sources and kind of exploit them. Mm-hmm. And says that, like, yeah, what we're going through right now is the discovery of fire. But, back in, the Cambrian, it was the discovery of flesh. It was like, the modern predator-prey dynamics come out of realizing that you don't have to sort of filter for your food in the water column or generate it yourself. And then even before
just eat each other.
Yeah, just eat each other. It's so easy. It's right there. And then even before that, photosynthesis was this massive thing, because up to that point, all life on the planet was chemosynthetic. It was getting energy by breaking bonds and molecules. Like life still does down around the sea vents. And so now it's a whole, now we've come on to a different thing. And, I interviewed Mingjin Liu for that same show, Complexity, episode 80. And he studies the evolution of modern plant-fungi relationships, and said that, like, I think up to about 400 million years ago, trees, like early trees existed, and so wood existed, but the mycorrhizal cohorts that live underground in the forest and eat dead trees, they did not exist. And so a lot of the modern fossil fuel deposits are from an era of the planet where logs were being formed and falling and nothing was eating them, and the whole surface of the planet was covered in falling logs. So, like, if you think about, what we're going through right now, and all of the industrial byproducts that we're creating, and like the gyre of plastic in the South Pacific and all this stuff. But like life has already started to evolve plastic-eating microbes that like we're already watching the biosphere adjust to this in the way that it has adjusted to similar endogenously created environmental disasters in the past. So it's not all cosmic. It's like there's a latency between us coming up with these major manufacturing and energy capture innovations, and then us figuring out how to close the material loops that are, we like new kinds of trash are invented, and then life comes in and figures out how to eat the trash.
Right.
And that happens over and over and over again. And the difference with this one is, can evolution adapt rapidly enough to making use of all of the new forms of trash that we're creating? Because like the number of new chemical compounds that we're creating over the last century are like exponentially greater than anything ever before. So in that way, it is different, but it's not totally unlike, coming up with photosynthesis. And we look at the modern atmosphere now, and we're like, oh, it's always been this way, but it hasn't. It's
right.
What we're looking at is a kind of uneasy piece that life figured out as a response to this potentially devastating innovation.
Yeah, it's interesting too, seeing, I'm sure you've seen the graph that Randall always shows of the atmosphere, the temperature in the atmosphere over like the last tens of thousands of years, and the crazy variations, and how it was like, I think it was during like the 1400s, it was like 10 degrees warmer than it is now. And that's when all the major cathedrals were built. That's when like the most incredible art has been created in our modern history.
I generally love the study of natural history because it helps keep us kind of humble. Mm-hmm. It helps us remember that all of the characteristics of contemporary life that we take for granted as static are mutable, that things have not always been this way, and that things will not always be this way. I interviewed Henry G. for Future Fossils podcast, I think episode 184. And Henry is the senior editor at Nature magazine, or Nature Journal, right, in the UK. He wrote a great book on the history of life and spends a little bit of time at the end of that book speculating.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Bubs. Bubs Naturals is a badass company that has collagen, peptides, it has coffee creamer, has coffee electrolytes, and they are amazing because they are a tribute company to a Navy SEAL and former CIA contractor Glenn Bubs Doherty, who died defending American freedom in Benghazi, Libya. Again, there is obviously no shortage of collagen products available on the internet, but I support Bubs because it is not only a superior product, but they support American veterans by donating 10% of all their proceeds to veteran organizations and 100% of their proceeds on Veterans Day. Bubs collagen peptide packets are easy to use as a daily supplement. I keep them in my truck and I drink them on the way to the gym. It's flavorless, easy to mix nature. It makes it easy to mix into anything. I prefer mixing it in coffee. You may not know, but after the age of 25, your natural production of collagen starts to fade, which can severely impact your skin. And an interesting thing about collagen is the more you supplement with it, the more your natural production increases. Since I started using it a few months ago, I've already noticed a huge improvement in my joint connective tissues, my skin elasticity, and the overall quality of my hair, believe it or not. You can support Bubs and this podcast by visiting bubsnaturals.com and using the code DJP at checkout for 20% off your first order. Again, that's bubsnaturals.com and use the promo code DJP at checkout for 20% off. It's linked below. Now back to the show.
About the distant future, like after human civilization has crumbled and, hundreds of millions of years into the future. Olaf Stapledon, another British author from the 1930s, wrote a couple of really great books that are kind of canonical, major inspiring works in 20th century science fiction called Last and First Men and Star Maker. Mm-hmm. And both of them do this. Like they look billions of years into the future, and that's like, I love that stuff. I love thinking about, what comes, if there was a time when plants and fungi were not locked together in symbiosis, and now we're seeing this kind of thing where like humans and machines are becoming kind of more and more symbiotic. And then then what? What's
Right.
What's 100 million years from now look like?
What are these kind of people? What do those people speculate?
Oh God, I mean, that's just where you get to have fun.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the sort of epistemic challenge to thinking.
Epistemic.
Yeah, like
Can you define that?
Yeah, so ontology is the study of what things are. Methodology is the study of how how you kind of know things, and then epistemology is related to that, but it's about
Belief and knowledge.
Yeah, how do you come to things? Who's asking? How are they asking? And so when you hear people, I hear people online talk a lot about how we're in the midst of an epistemic crisis right now in human society because our information technologies.
There's too much information.
Right. Yeah. So we don't know how to make sense of them. We don't know how to validate information anymore.
Right.
And I'll send you here. Let me pull up I love citing this paper or this essay by my friend Jamie Stantonian here. Apocalyptic cults in the early modern information explosion.
Apocalyptic cults.
Yeah. So he's talking about the printing press and the 30 Years' War and how the decline.
Do you have it pulled up on your thing?
Yeah, it's right here.
You can just switch to him, Steve.
Yeah, that the loss of authority, the legitimacy crisis that the printing press posed to the church was, created a power vacuum into which flowed all of these different apocalyptic cults that were spreading their own versions of the Bible through self-printed pamphlets. And so, the moment where Munich ends up becoming a walled city full of end times apocalyptic fanatics, and then goes into battle with the Catholic Church, and bishops send soldiers to reclaim Munich. We're going through something like that right now, where the amount of the time that it's taking to generate new information, I don't know if you've noticed, but most scientific papers now, people are just publishing stuff to archive, and then it's there. Archive.org being this sort of preprint server run by Cornell University, where all of the machine learning papers right now are going straight to archive before they make it through peer review. And so people have access to all of this newly produced knowledge, but it's being generated faster than the process whereby academic journals were created, the process that academic journals evolved in order to sort of vet things.
Who's producing all these papers?
I mean, a lot of them are university research, but there's private research, and then there's just people working in the garage, and so with COVID here, I'll pull up
And why are they publishing them direct to archive.com?
Well, archive.org, ARXIV. This is where it's the process of science has changed somewhat over the course of our lives to so that there's this additional. Not everybody does this, but a lot of people believe in open science as a way of saying we're going to publish our work as a public good, as a service to public conversation, and then it's going to go through the process of peer review still, but more work is being done than can possibly be peer reviewed, and so you get into these things. I wrote this paper about this in 2020 about how do you make sense of this stuff now? This was about COVID and how the problem that scientific institutions got into with the public during COVID was that, people have been kind of trained to believe that science is this sort of, fixed point, there's an orthodoxy.
Yes.
And it's not just a free-for-all. It's
so
not.
Science is a broad term.
Yeah.
Right? Science, Right. Trust the science. We're the scientists. We are, the people in the ivory tower who have studied this our whole lives and have the credentials to tell you what to do. There's a sort of a mightier than thou sort of vibe.
Well, I mean, it really is like all science, all knowledge, you can kind of trace it around a circle of, an observation that starts from personal experience and then is, you ask a friend to, hey, like stand here and look at this and tell me what you see. And they see the same thing, then that intersubjective validation, I-thou validation is more robust than just I saw a UFO or whatever. And then, but then like maybe the two of you grew up in the same house.
Right.
And so you're biased in the same way, and so then, science, as most people understand it, is this third person validation where you bring in somebody from a completely different set of experiences and they're going to, you try to find, you stress test these claims as hard as you can, but there is no fundamental, there's no moment where you have, like the replication crisis going on right now in psychology and in pharmacological medicine has a lot to do with the fact that the mechanical, like the action of different psychoactive or different medical things have so much to do with expectation and the placebo effect and so on that you can run the experiments 20 years later and get different results because the culture has changed.
Right. And
so people's expectations have changed. And like the way that there's a famous set of psychological experiments done by Daryl Bem, who called Feeling the Future. Let's see. So Daryl reversed the time series on all of these famous psychology experiments, I think 9 famous psychology experiments. And this piece is him basically saying, we took for granted that the past comes before the future. But if you reverse the order of these experiments, you can see that people are, like, you get results that are as statistically significant if you have them, select something before they actually see the slide or whatever. So he was saying, like, look, according to your own standards, the field of psychology needs to admit that we have some sort of precognitive ability. And people went insane over this paper. And it was the result of an ongoing debate in clinical psychology or in experimental psychology about whether the discipline itself is flawed or whether like a lot of people claimed that he was burying negative results, and a lot of people reproduced his work, but then denied that they had. And it's just it's a complete mess in there. And so like when this issue of, it's not that science is broken, it's that science itself continues to evolve and we get more and more nuanced about the way that we structure our experiments and the way that we validate, the way we understand the statistical support for a given phenomenon. And then also, Max Planck is famous for saying that science proceeds one death at a time or one funeral at a time because people get so stuck in their thinking that they deny the validity of anomalous evidence and they need to be replaced by younger researchers with fresh eyes.
And it's so corruptible as well.
I mean, everything is. I mean, I don't want to single science out here because there is a problem generally. I interviewed Thi Nguyen, a University of Utah philosopher, several years ago. And let's see, where is this? Oh, that's on Substack. Thi Nguyen and I had a really interesting conversation about expert identification and how basically, like, if you're not an expert in a field, then you can't actually validate what an expert is saying, and the amount of time it takes to develop expertise is always longer than the amount of time that you have to communicate something, like a complex idea.
Right.
And so it's not just climate scientists versus everyone else. It's also, geopolitical experts versus everyone else. It's also plumbers versus everyone else. It's like there are kind of an unspecified, kind of theoretically infinite number of things that you can be an expert in. And as knowledge becomes more and more developed, as our body of knowledge becomes more developed, then the amount of time it takes to learn some of these fields means that like there are more kinds of expertise. It takes longer to acquire that expertise. And so we're on the surface of this like growing volume of information that is, with these major information technology revolutions like printing press or the internet, we hit these periodic crises in being able to understand how to articulate the knowledge and like bring it together and like unify it. And so Simon DeDeo, a Carnegie Mellon professor I interviewed years ago for Complexity, talks about this. Let me see if I can find this. Oh, this is a fantastic talk he gave years ago. Oh, wait, not this one. Super Theories, DeDeo, Consilience. He gave a talk. Yeah, here we go. Super Theories and Consilience from Alchemy to Electromagnetism, looking over the history of the Proceedings of the Royal Society, the oldest scientific journal, and running statistical analysis on this body of data that showed that every 150 years or so, we go through this wave where knowledge, I think this is it. Yeah, so you can see these spikes in the confidence of, this is mutual information in bits, is the linkage between different disciplines in science. And so we go through these things where about 100 years, we get more and more unified in our scientific understanding. So like you can see where the study of electricity and the study of magnetism ends up becoming the study of electromagnetics. It's like it becomes one discipline. And then there's a 50-year gap where suddenly that innovation in scientific thinking generates so much new insight that we lose the plot. And so we're in one of these right now where the successes of the scientific endeavor have given us so much more to consider now that we don't know how to fit it all together. And we're going to go through another couple of decades before it starts making sense again. But it's not a crisis in terms of like what science is, and it's not a crisis that's unique to the academy or to any other specific institution that deals with, it's not a crisis unique to journalism. This is something that happens with every new institution, and within 150 years, whatever institutions we come up with now to unify the knowledge produced by the internet will be in crisis again, and we'll have to come up with some new system. But science will persist. Science will continue to evolve and become more and more effective and capable of making sense of things. It just won't be science like most people think of it now.
Yeah, it seems like there's got to be there's got to be something else, like another way to like everything can't just be weighed and measured in a lab, right? Like this is one of the things I was talking to Annie Jacobson about a couple weeks ago when she wrote this book called The Phenomena, and she was explaining that some of these precognitive ESP abilities that people have, they can't be duplicated and they can't be weighed and they can't be measured, and there's this huge divide and there's this clash that goes on between the phenomena and the scientific method, right? Because they just don't mix, and you can't duplicate any of this stuff. But it's very much a real thing, and this is something I was also talking to Jack Sarfati about a little bit. He's like, these people. Who was I asking him? I think I was asking about somebody who was coming in who was like skeptical about the whole UFO phenomenon. I'm like, and Jack, obviously he's got his opinions.
Yeah, he's like, I'll fight him.
These people are fucking idiots, Danny. They're fucking idiots. I know this shit because I've seen it. It exists, okay? Just because you can't fucking weigh it and put it in a beaker doesn't mean it's not real.
Totally. Well, I mean, so my graduate advisor, I ended up going to grad school for a little bit and then dropping out because, life. But my graduate advisor, Sean Esbjorn Hargens, worked with the American integral philosopher Ken Wilber on this, what he called integral methodological pluralism, which is an attempt to take postmodern philosophy, where we recognize that even our empirical investigations of the world are constrained by our language, and that there is no way for us to know something with total absolute objectivity, because like we all kind of live in a virtual reality.
Yes.
This kind of like our brain is generating this thing based on experience. And,
everything. I talk about this all the time with people that I have in here who like to talk about everything. And it's like, you haven't been to this part of the world and seen what's happened here. You fucking read news articles and watch YouTube. So do I. I do the same fucking thing. Like there's like, one of the things that really fucking frustrates me about some people is that people like to talk about things as if they are like absolute fucking fact and they know it. And these people, their job is to know stuff, obviously, but all they do is they read stuff that other people write, that those people got from somebody else or something else that they read or that they saw.
Yeah. I mean, so that's the thing, is that like as, even the most rational person has to base some of their behavior in the world on expert claims made by other people that they can't directly validate.
Yes.
And that this doesn't mean that it's an ontological free-for-all. Like it doesn't mean that like there isn't, that we can't approach truth and that there aren't some people that see certain truths more clearly than other people. And so like it's important to be clear about that. But what it does mean is that we need to be more humble about what we, like the things that we are taking for granted on the basis of belief, because we don't have the time or the unlimited energy to sit there and scrutinize everything everyone ever tells us. Right. And so, Hargens and Wilber wrote this really cool piece for the Oxford Handbook of Religion and Science several years ago, unifying this. So like, I don't know, is this up on the screen? Yeah. So like, you can
punch in on it a little bit.
Yeah, let me see a good example. So this is a piece that a chart that Sean worked on with Ken, where like you can see empirical science fits into one corner of this chart, where they're looking at the exteriors, the descriptions and behaviors of phenomena through the lens of singular entities. So this is like animal behaviorism or cognitive science. But then, there are other ways, there are other schools of knowledge, like phenomenology, which is concerned with the interiority, the felt sense, the qualitative claims that can be made about your own internal personal experience. And then you have, different sort of ethnic studies and the study of meaning and language are the cultural sort of interior plural dimensions of experience. It's like what you and I agree a cat means, the word cat.
Yeah.
And so on. And so like you can take this framework and you can start to say that, for instance, Zen meditation as a technique does obey the scientific method in that they give you they give you an injunction. They give you sit on a mat for 20 years observing your breath. And then you will have an experience that an expert in the field can tell you you've had this experience, or they can tell that you're lying. And that is peer review. And that is, like when people like Terence McKenna and Tim Leary compared taking psychedelics to looking through the microscope, what they were saying was there is an experimental protocol. And if you follow this protocol, you end up with these results, and these results can be verified, but it's not quantitative in the way that a lot of people mistakenly kind of conflated with science, where they say, only science science is only the concern about quantitative data.
We don't have a way to measure a dream, right?
Well, I mean, we're getting there. Like there is, for years I've been saying that I expect that one day I'm going to have a kid, and then the kid's going to be streaming their dreams on TikTok or whatever, with a brain computer interface, and you'll be a dream influencer because you'll be able to just let other people subscribe to your feed. And then just a couple months ago, this group found a way to use machine learning to translate the visual cortex activity into images, and so you're able to see what somebody else is dreaming.
What?
Yeah, this is a recent thing, but like I do what I can to stay on top of AI research, and this is a big deal. That like,
Who did this?
good question. Let's see.
Like, how do they produce the images? Like, is it video,
Dream
still images?
machine learning. Yeah, no, they can. You can pull. Let's see here.
Deep dreaming is a prompt.
Brain scan. Well, deep dream is something else. Hold on.
Okay.
Oh yeah, AI recreates what people see by reading their brain scans.
What?
This is not the most recent research,
Holy shit.
but this is preliminary research to the stuff that I'm talking about here. And so this is a year ago. It's way better now, and so it's not going to be long before we can actually get into people's heads and do some really, really interesting work on, like for instance, one of the things I've always been really curious about, and I'm excited to see develop over the next year or so, is doing this for people that are on psychedelics. And so like, I have my friends Sarah Huntley and David J. Brown have a book in edit right now with Inner Traditions on a field guide to DMT entities. And they, Sarah created illustrations of all of these different major types of things that people kind of frequently see when they're tripping.
Right.
And, and so we're going to be able to get kind of to the point where, one of my favorite pieces, let me see if I can pull this up. One of my favorite essays of all time is Aldous Huxley's introduction to Heaven and Hell. Mm-hmm. Let's see, Painting While Dancing, Michael Garfield. So let me just read you this quote, because this is sort of the marching orders of my whole life. He says, "Like the Earth of 100 years ago, our mind still has its darkest Africas, its unmapped Borneos and Amazonian basins. In relation to the fauna of these regions, we are not yet zoologists. We are mere naturalists and collectors of specimens. The fact is unfortunate, but we have to accept it. We have to make the best of it. However lowly, the work of the collector must be done before we can proceed to the higher scientific tasks of classification, analysis, experiment, and theory making. Like the giraffe and the duck-billed platypus, the creatures inhabiting these remoter regions of the mind are exceedingly improbable. Nevertheless, they exist. They are facts of observation, and as such, they cannot be ignored by anyone who is honestly trying to understand the world in which he lives." And it goes on, but this, my entire life, after the 4 years I spent as a scientific illustrator at the University of Kansas Natural History Museum, I've been thinking about, the art that I make as, in light of this kind of work, in light of like going in. My buddy Android Jones talks about this too, about, visionary art, which is the American kind of tradition that came out of fantastic realism in Europe, which came out of surrealism. And so there's a direct lineage between like Dali and Ernst Fuchs and H.R. Giger, who were looking at dreams and visionary states and then just painting what they saw. And then by the time that comes over to the States through like Robert Venosa and Alex Gray and kind of the modern, forefathers and foremothers of visionary art.
I like the dinosaur with the flying saucer.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's...
Dude, let me get some art. I need some art.
Oh, I
for my
will.
studio.
I'll send you some prints. Yeah. But the...
That's
so
amazing,
there's a whole tradition, the tradition of artists that I grew up with are
cool.
people that think about, going in with, a dedication to having, unusual or quote unquote non-ordinary experiences, and then treating it like a natural history illustrator. And, trying to record this stuff. And so, like, my friends and I all paint this stuff, but then, like, it won't be long before, just as, generative AI has allowed non-painters to paint.
Right.
It won't be that long before it allows people that have just really incredible, vivid dreams and trips and other things to present fairly accurate representations of their own inner world that other people can compare to their own weird experiences and say, oh, there's something here. We should dig on the X,
Yeah.
see what stable features we can encode in scientific theory. So, yeah.
There was an article that I don't know if it was a podcast I was listening to, or if this was one of your essays that you wrote about how like the role reversal between creativity and AI, how we're like switching the roles, and like AI is sort of like turning us into blobs. And
This one?
yes, I think it was this
Yeah.
one that I read this morning. And it's something that one of the things that I've noticed recently is that like when it comes to the medium that which I publish this podcast, which is mostly YouTube, we get most of our audience on YouTube. I noticed a lot of people on YouTube, and I know there's ad agencies doing this as well, but we've gotten so far off track that like people are using ChatGPT and AI to literally tell them what kind of videos to make. Giving them all the footage and all the frames for their videos, giving them the music, giving them the thumbnails, giving them the titles. And I know ad agencies are even using the stuff to like tell them where to put logos on commercials, how long commercials should be, how they should be narrated, and all this stuff. And it's like AI is sucking all the creativity out of the human, not really out of the human mind. Just it's like we don't need to do it anymore. So it's like let's just let AI do it.
It is weird. So yeah, this piece that you're talking about, improvising out of algorithmic isolation, was commissioned by a friend who wanted me to write about improv versus surveillance capitalism, right? And like that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the attention economy and using stuff like gaze tracking software to tell how long somebody is looking at whatever, and then.
They also have the zoom on Instagram. If you zoom in on something, they'll like start giving you more of that person's shit.
Yeah, exactly. So like all of this is, the stuff that grew out of creating an ad revenue model for the web is, it's so like I want to link that piece to two other pieces. Let me see. There's this piece I wrote a couple years ago called The Evolution of Surveillance, talking about this in this way, talking about augmented reality and spatial computing and so on.
What do you mean when you say surveillance? Are you talking specifically about like the way ad agencies target people to target ads to them and stuff like that?
Well, it's about behavior, the behaviorism generally, right? Like the more cameras we have, the more keystroke logging we use, the more gaze tracking we use. It's about trying to model behavior, and then in order to either intervene and shape the way that people are behaving, or in order to predict them such that you can sell them things more efficiently, et cetera. And this is, the point that I was making in this essay is that this is not actually new, that like all of these new sensory and like behavior modeling innovations that we're making with digital technology are an extension of this longer arms race between predators and prey that goes back at least to the evolution of the eye, where it's like suddenly you have this whole new dimension where you're not just sensing a prey animal or an organism along a kind of chemical gradient, and you can actually see something at a distance and watch it turn to avoid you, and then you can chase it. And that something like that is going on right now, where Cambridge Analytica knows your Facebook browsing behavior so well that it's able to predict you more effectively than your own spouse, and like this kind of stuff. And so what's happening is that in this piece on improvisation, the evolution of these surveillance infrastructure, the algorithms and the camera networks and all this stuff, is modifying people's behavior in two different ways. One is it's making people, like living inside of these systems. You've got 6 different emoji reacts on Facebook. You don't have like a whole multidimensional spectrum of human emotional response. You're limited to 6 sort of stock responses, or you can leave a comment, but like, so like the more embedded we are in the machinery of civilization, the more it constrains our behavioral repertoire in certain ways, even as it creates more options for us in other ways. And then the other thing is that all of these systems, like evolution is itself a form of improvisation. And evolution is this, in the way that I've come to understand it through, these like really like a fundamental study of evolution as a process, includes more than just genetic evolution. It includes, the way that your brain wires neurons together as a way of encoding stable features in your own environment, so that your behavioral response at the level of an individual has evolved to meet, the environment at that time scale and not just at the time scale of genetic inheritance and so on. And so like the thing with, these systems is that, yeah, they are, it's not simple. I mean, it's not adequate to say that they're making us dumber, but it's neither is it adequate to say that they're making us smarter.
Right.
Like, we are collectively smarter, but in certain ways individually dumber, but then are also capable of hyper-specializing and knowing things about the world to a far deeper extent than was, possible. There was no such thing as cognitive neuroscience 200 years ago,
Right.
And so like, at any rate, like the machines become more and more lifelike as they evolve to model the behavior of living organisms, namely people. And then we become in certain ways more mechanical, but the place where those two trends meet on the horizon is that, you've got Yuval Harari's, he gave a Google Tech Talk on the religions of Silicon Valley a few years ago, the New Religions of the 21st Century, talks at Google, February 2015, where he talked about how the revolution in computing has made it so that we no longer have a notion that humans are these sort of isolated, self-determining, self-authoring, rational actors, which is like the idea that dominated economics for like most of the last 100 years. And now what we have is that the human is sort of a bundle of different unconscious algorithms that are all like modular and connected and nested inside of each other, and that the human being is nested inside of a larger social order that is itself kind of an organism in its own right, but that it's sort of like a turtles all the way down of unconscious algorithmic reactivity to each other. So like, the sort of Blade Runner conclusion that you come to is that humans are robots and robots are people. That's a contentious philosophical claim, but the Buddha said as much, right? Like a lot of the Eastern non-dual traditions are about how everything that we take for granted as the behavior of an organism, that it's choosing what it does. If you inquire deeply enough into the nature of the mind, you realize that all of your choices are sort of mechanical responses to your conditioning. That's like, karma is like an impossibly complex network of mutual causation.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by PXG. When PXG says nobody makes golf clubs the way they do, they're not lying. My personal experience with buying golf clubs and using different brands of golf clubs is I always thought the more expensive golf clubs were, the better the quality. But my new set of PXGs has blown that perception out of the water. And when I heard about their new Black Ops driver, the driver that promises you don't have to sacrifice distance for forgiveness, I absolutely had to try it. Last weekend, PXG invited me out to one of the high-end golf courses out in Tampa so I could get a custom fitting with their new Black Ops driver. And it was incredible. One of their golf pros spent an hour with me, helping me dial in all the little measurements and all the little tweaks in the golf club to make sure that I had the perfect fit for my driver. This PXG Black Ops driver is a breakthrough in driver technology. It's a complete and total victory in golf club engineering, something like you've never seen before. Black Ops drivers are adjustable to deliver a combined MOI of 10,000 plus for unreal forgiveness. That's ridiculous. ridiculously high. And the higher the MOI, the more forgiving the club will play, meaning you don't have to square the ball perfectly for it to go straight and to get distance. Add PXG's new advanced material face technology and you get incredible ball speed that pushes distance to the absolute limits. That's more forgiveness, more distance, and no sacrifices. The term game changer has been thrown around so much that it's lost its meaning. But trust me when I tell you, the PXG driver is a true game changer. Learn more and get free shipping on all PXG equipment by going to pxg.com/Danny and using the code Danny at checkout. That's pxg.com/Danny and use the code Danny for free shipping on all equipment. It's linked below. Now back to the show.
You know, and so like that's kind of where, you know, the tech world and, you know, revolutions in neuroscience and so on have taken us, is like you're no longer you know, to the extent that you're no longer an individual person now, right? You're a city made of cells. Some of those cells are human, some of them are not, and there's a sense in which you, at the cellular level, all of your cells are individuals. They're just joined in this thing, and you are joined in this bigger thing, you know, that we call society, which is a kind of superorganism. And so, like, where we draw the lines around individuality depend on how far away we're standing from a given phenomenon. And so, you know, this notion, that's, you know, going back to this stuff that Wilbur and Esper and Hargens worked on, like that's, so like there's a sense in which everything is individual, and there's a sense in which it's plural or collective. And so similarly, there's a sense in which free will, there's a stance you can look at where free will exists. And if you move, then it looks like everything is just sort of blindly, deterministically causing everything else. And, you know, the question of like free will is a question about the philosophical stance that we want to take on emergence. Like, is emergent behavior something that actually exists, or does it just appear to exist because you know, like we see order in a new way if we stand and look at it at the behavior of the cosmos from a different perspective. You know, so I take all of this stuff as like you know, a lot of the stuff we can't know for sure because there are limits to our knowledge and the knowability of things. And so it's like, well, we're probably better off assuming that it's both, and that efforts to try and like pin down reality in one way or another, you know, saying like, oh, this is, you know, something is purely objective or purely subjective, or choice does or does not exist. That these are methodological artifacts, you know, like, are you a noun or are you a verb? Mm-hmm. You know, which one, why does one have to be more true than the other? Anyway, that's a rant.
Do you often take DMT?
No, not in, I mean, you know, everybody's got their college years, but.
How many times have you done it?
Oh God. That's a good question. Not in a while.
Is that, did you get into psychedelics after you were into all the paleontology stuff? And did psychedelics sort of like catapult you into all this?
Definitely part of it. Yeah. I mean, I think the question of the evolution of intelligence and consciousness is hot on the heels of realizing that you that everything you thought you knew is up for grabs, right? You know, and you're like, okay, well, what is the mind, and where does it come from, and you know, how does language work? Yeah, and those are very undergraduate, like, you know, yeah. So, but you know, the older one gets, the cooler one's brain runs, and
the older one gets, the cooler one's brain runs.
Well, I just mean like your earlier in life, your brain is a noisier object.
Yes.
You know, children are very like distracted and playful and creative, and then as you get older, University of California, Berkeley child psychologist Alison Gopnik calls this the explore-exploit tension, where it's like as you get older in life, or as a system ages,
Yes.
even, those systems become more conservative and more risk averse. And then at some point, you can kind of go back. Let's see, where did I put this? I wrote a piece on this a while ago. The future is noisy, talking about like there's a curve in life where as your senses start to fail you in old age, you become more childlike again. You become more of a dreamer and more playful. But yeah, there's like the relationship.
Wear diapers again.
Yeah, I like this. Yeah, exactly. The relationship between like the notion that comes out of DMT research that the basically waking state is a kind of dream constrained by the wiring of the brain to its senses. And so like the more signal you get from the outside world, the more your signal to noise ratio goes up. And then as your senses develop or as they fail, that ratio changes. And so like different, there are processes, like if you think about that kind of that arc, there are moments in the process of the production of scientific knowledge that are high noise, and then there are moments that are high signal. Like when you're collecting data, you want your noise to be as low as possible, but when you're trying to come up with a new hypothesis, you want to turn the noise up. And so again, this has to do with like the way that for instance, the people that are like authors talk about, you don't want to criticize your first draft while you're writing it. You want to save editing, which is a high signal to noise ratio process, for later. And then you want the original draft of your manuscript to be generated in a kind of sprint of noise production.
Right.
So there's a really great paper. There's an exchange of letters on the role of noise in innovation in complex systems. Let's see. Yeah, the role of noise in collective intelligence, where famous psychologist Daniel Kahneman basically says, noise is the enemy. We're trying to get rid of noise. And then, his critics, led by David Krakauer and David Wolpert, say, yeah, actually, if you eradicate noise from a system, you lose all creativity in the system. You lose the ability for that system to adapt to surprise in its environment. So I don't know if that answers your question, but there are definitely times in life where it's appropriate, perhaps, or it's more appropriate, if you to pursue trance and psychonautic adventure and lateral thinking and creative weirdness.
Yeah. I think like the farther down the road we get in the advancement of technology, and if we ever hit the point of, I'm sure we will, but the point of like a singularity, we would maybe humanity will just want to escape this reality that we are in right now. Like it's like the Matrix, right? It's like we're unplugged right now. And maybe like a certain group of the human population will just go like dive into psychedelics and just try to like DMTX themselves into that world for the rest of their lives. And some people will fucking join the machines.
Yeah, so our buddies Egan and Patrick at Noonautics, I'm on the advisory board of this organization that wants to start doing extended state DMT work and other kinds of fundamental psychedelic research. I'm really excited about this because I've always been more interested in asking fundamental scientific questions than in therapeutic research. Obviously we're in the middle of a mental health crisis. It's very important that people have access to the best possible tools to maintain their mental health. I know a lot of people who have benefited from a therapeutic encounter with psychedelics, but when it comes to, asking questions about the nature of reality and the greatest mysteries that science can ask, then it seems obvious that we've left a huge bid on the table over the last several decades to use psychedelics as scientific instruments and to ask questions that we can only ask in different states of consciousness, and to use these things in a different way. I've been pursuing that line of of questioning on the show for a while.
You need to talk to the people at the CIA. They've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah. So like that's an interesting case, right? Where the CIA is not constrained by the same sort of socioeconomic concerns that academic research is,
Moral
right?
concerns.
Right, exactly. You've got like Bustamante like on your show advocating for enhanced interrogation because it's practical, it's how you get results. And so like that's the thing is like military research has a lower barrier to being like it has more willingness to pursue something that might work.
Blue sky research.
Yes.
Just try shit, whether it benefits us or not.
Right. Whether we understand the mechanism for it or not.
Maybe it's useless knowledge.
Right. Actually, and that's an interesting fact about the Cold War is that Russia took a very different approach to physics and psychology research behind the Iron Curtain and was not as bound as American academic research to try and understand how, to try and pose a mechanism for stuff like telekinesis. Before they would actually go ahead and look at it. And so like one of the most interesting stories from American science over the last, 50 years is the story of the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. I talk about it in episode 186 of Future Fossils, a manifesto for weird science.
By the way, I love the name of your podcast.
Thanks.
Future Fossils is such a sick name.
Thanks. Yeah, it's that
Paleontologist-futurist.
It's that whole thing. Yeah, take the whole span in at once. But the Paralab, Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research, was funded by, I think it was Lockheed. Mm-hmm. It was either Lockheed or McDonnell. I'm going to catch myself on this. But here we go. The full show notes are actually on Patreon. But yeah, they got a grant from aerospace because aerospace wanted to know whether the brain as an electromagnetic phenomenon was influencing the sensitive electronics inside a fighter pilot cockpit. And so the dean of Princeton Engineering got together with aerospace and said, let's check this out, and spent 27 years pursuing research into subtle but statistically significant effects of human intention and emotion on both electronic and mechanical, ostensibly random systems. So like, there's that you drop balls down into the like a matrix of pegs, and you can see the distribution as the balls fall to one side of it. You get like a bell curve distribution, but they found that you could have people sit in front of one of those and will the balls to the right or the left. And that you could do the same thing with pseudo-random electronic number generators. And so some people were better at this than other people. And that this is a skill that could be trained. Like that you can actually, you have a small but statistically significant impact of willpower on the outcome of things like dice. And they ran hundreds and hundreds of experiments with thousands of subjects over 27 years. And ran metastatistical analyses on these results and found that they anticipated all of the criticism. They were fiercely attacked even by other departments inside of Princeton Engineering. And so they had to tighten it up. And like people like Russell Targ and Dean Radin that work in parapsychology understand the enormous pressure that they are under to be as rigorous as possible. And so you see things like Larry Dossey's work on the healing power of prayer, where they've done triple blind research, where like the people that are actually, they did triple blind research on prayer and fertility, where the people that were receiving the prayer and the doctors in the fertility clinic, none of them were aware that this was being done. And so like they know that there are higher, that they have to pole vault over a higher bar. And often a lot of the parapsychological research is cunning methodologically in ways that normal research doesn't have the responsibility to be. And so Princeton Engineering, found that, they were like, look, in order for these results to be insignificant, we would have had to have buried like something like hundreds of millions of negative results Like we would have had to hide more research than we ever had time to conduct by orders of magnitude. And so, yeah, so there's like, but this is a case where they still don't know why it works, you know? And so, or at least they don't. Maybe the CIA people do.
That's interesting.
But they, you know, they didn't lead with, well, we don't know how it works. They led with, is there something here? And if there is something here, at that point we can start. I mean, that's how science should work, right? Is like,
exactly.
Check the anomaly, and then you start to create hypotheses about what you're actually observing.
Well, when you have unlimited money to research shit that you don't know what the outcome's going to be, you can discover. There's no end to what you can discover. I just had a guy in here last week. He's a professor of the history of religion, and he's from Texas, Jeff Kripal.
Yes.
You know him?
Yeah, so Jeff Kripal was the PhD advisor for Eric Davis.
Okay.
And he's an interesting dude.
He was explaining to me how an aerospace gravitational propulsion engineer hit him up and asked him to meet at MIT and talk about religion and the history of Catholic nuns levitating. Mm-hmm. Like, why, like I think the guy was from JPL, like a JPL aeronautics propulsion guy is interested in a professor of the history of religion. Like, what a crazy combination.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's just like those guys have no limit to what they can look into and what they can study and what they can research. Like, who knows what they've figured out, you know?
I mean, I think one of the first episodes of yours I listened to was the interview you did with Diana Pasulka. You know, and I love her and Kripal for this reason, is that, you know, you get to a point where people know that you're sympathetic to weird, and so they start, like, you know, Kripal has that whole book. What is it, The Flip? Where he, you know, it's
He's
like
got so many books.
70 different reputable physicists who would only speak to him under the condition of anonymity, because they were in the closet about the fact that they no longer believe in materialism. You know, that they're idealists. They believe that consciousness is primary and that matter is like an optical illusion of consciousness.
Yes.
And this is something that, you know, you go back to, I just interviewed Neil Thies, who's an NYU pathologist who wrote a book about complexity science and non-duality. That's the next episode of Future Fossils. And he talks about this, about how, you know, a lot of physicists, even among the quantum physicists, Niels Bohr famously was one of these people that decided that the metaphysical implications of modern physics are that consciousness is primary. And this is hugely debated still, right? Like it's one of these things that, as Neil talks about in his work, is obvious to someone who has done a certain amount of phenomenological research into the nature of their own minds. And it's completely unobvious to everyone else. And so, you know, looping back around to this conversation about what science is, you know, like, well, you know, you have these incredibly strongly convergent, robust agreements about the nature of consciousness coming from different schools of inquiry, you know, like Western Christian esotericism, you know, Advaita Vedanta Hinduism, Kashmir Saivist Judaism, you know, Zen Buddhism, et cetera. Like, all of them are saying something similar enough that it sounds like it could be the same thing about, you know, the actual nature of reality. But the amount of work it takes to get to verifying those claims is equivalent in terms of a time and energy investment, and equivalent in terms of, you know, the need to be supported by a community of expert practitioners, to something like making claims about the mathematical basis for wave particle complementarity. Like, it's like you're asking a lot of someone to be able to be both an advanced physicist and an advanced meditator, you know? And so there's like, you know, therein lies the tension between people that are claiming that matter is the basis of reality versus people that are claiming consciousness is the basis of reality.
Yeah, there's a lot of friction between those two.
Yeah, and
worlds.
it's like, why not both? ¿Por qué no los dos? You know?
Right. I want to get back to what we were talking about with the people that were trying, you guys like stuff like similar to what Andrew Gallimore is trying to do, like map the DMT world, or like do the extended state psychedelic trips and figure out what that is. What have you found out about that, and what kind of stuff are you researching in regards to these studies?
Well, yeah. So, one of the big things I'm excited about working with Noonautics is that, okay, so a few years ago, I gave this presentation at the Diverse Intelligences Summer Institute, which is a really fascinating kind of transdisciplinary congress of people working in all different fields of research, machine learning, animal behavior, human cognition, evolutionary biology, and then they have storytellers also. It's not just scientists, it's also, authors and artists and philosophers. And so my friends Jacob Foster and Erica Cartmill, who are at IU Bloomington now, run this program every summer at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. And it was during COVID, so we had to do this remotely. But I got to participate a couple years ago and I was part of a working group that was interested in questions about what they call agnostic biosignature detection, or like in astrobiology, the notion that we're looking for life on the basis of a certain idea of what life is.
Yep.
That life is carbon-based, or that life requires water, or like all of these things. And
they send radio signals.
Right. They send, yeah, exactly. Like in you've had Gallimore on, you've had Andrew Gallimore, talking about the transcension hypothesis and like all of this interesting stuff about, in what way, astrobiology is like the perfect, and origins of life, which is very related, are disciplines in science that stare right down into the barrel. They're looking directly into the abyss of what it is that we think we know, and how can we challenge those assumptions to dilate the aperture of our inquiry, right? And so like this you can find this slideshow, Diverse Aliens. These are my contributions to this larger presentation, this group presentation, on how not only are there hard limits, like this fantastic 1999 paper that Lockman, Newman, and Moore wrote on the physical limits of communication, which says that any optimally encoded electromagnetic communication is mathematically provable as indistinguishable from blackbody radiation. So like, this means that if an alien civilization is smarter than us and wants to encrypt its radio communications, we will never know, because it will look to us like the noise, like it'll look like cosmic background radiation to us.
Right.
And so there is, there are all of these, again, like these are fundamental epistemic issues in life detection. And so, there are things about SETI, right, which are just kind of hilariously weird. Like the fact that we are looking for, it's been over 20 years. It's been 25 years since this paper came out. And yet, the dominant paradigm of biosignature detection is that we are, looking for waves, like, rays that are being passed from alien to alien. And for whatever reason, we are systematically ignoring people like Chris Bledsoe, right? Like the Bledsoe family, who are saying life.
I don't think he's being ignored.
Well, no, a lot of people are paying attention, but it's interesting who's not paying attention. A lot of interesting
people are paying attention. It's really interesting who is paying attention to that guy.
Tell me more.
I don't know if you watched the podcast or not, but he's like surrounded by spooks.
Yeah. So again, one of these questions of like, at the same time, NASA astrobiology, which is a fantastic group of scientists, is not paying attention to them. And why is that? And again,
maybe they are.
Well,
there was a couple guys,
openly.
A couple people that are really deep, according to him. At least one guy who was like very, very deep, lifelong into NASA was very, very interested in him and spent a lot of time with him. The guy who likes to stay complete. He was anonymous in Diana's book.
Yeah, but Sokol wrote about him.
Yeah,
too.
She calls him Tyler D.
Right.
And Jeff Kripal met this guy too.
Yeah. But, it's interesting. So like years ago, I painted at an event at the NASA Ames facility in California. And it was a big party held for Yuri's Night, celebrating the first orbital human, mission. And afterwards, I talked a little bit to the NASA film crew that was on attachment to document this party being held in their aircraft hangar. And I was like, so you guys have seen some stuff, right? And they're like, oh yeah, we have. But there is but you can't write that stuff into a line item for an NSF grant, right? Like that funding on that kind of stuff is coming from a different
DARPA,
a different, arm, a different pocketbook. And like, I know a ton of people that work in astrobiology that are actually significantly more open-minded about this stuff and where we could be looking than they are academically allowed to be. Like Diana has talked about, like that she has to maintain a kind of, a performance of academic, like an ironic distance from her research when she's talking to other religious scholars, that she can't talk about what she actually thinks is going on. She can only talk about it through, a kind of anthropological curiosity about other people's weird beliefs, and so like whatever, and a lot of people are constrained in this way. But yeah, so the point is that like this stuff is, if you're honest about the science, we know, for instance, that that around the age of 5 months, your brain starts screening out certain things that you're seeing.
Right.
And that, so they...
Yeah, this is what Gallimore was talking about, too.
Right,
It's a filter. Your senses are filters.
Perceptual filters and masking. And so there are things that you can do, like take psychedelics, that overwhelm those processes. So to put it in like a machine learning language, your brain is running prediction algorithms that are overfit to training data and therefore fail at predicting out of sample data. They fail at predicting stuff that is like, after a certain age, you can look straight at something that is unlike what you saw in the first year of your life and not even see it. And so there are ways that we have learned to systematically hack around these filters. And so this is why the use of psychedelics as a scientific instrument strikes me as so important, and in particular, important to questions that are, prosecuting the status, the ontological status of these weird things like, mantises or whatever that keep showing up in people's trips. So like, again, there's...
and mantises show up in what kind of trips?
Oh man, my friend Stuart Davis, who we won't have time to go into my own bevy of UFO experiences on this show probably, but like my buddy Stuart Davis, who's a member of that integral philosophy community in Colorado that I spent some time in, and a fantastic singer-songwriter, came out of the closet several years ago as a more or less lifelong experiencer or contactee, and started a podcast called Aliens and Artists, that the whole thing is archived now, and you can go back and you can listen to my recount of various experiences that I've had, and start with his, though, because his are really profound. Like he and his family had, and I maybe continue to have years and years of interaction, like the Bledsoes, with these beings that were kind of bothering them every night at 3 a.m., would like show up outside their house. And he jokes about how his wife got to the point where she was just like, I've got stuff to do in the morning. I don't care. I wish they would just leave us alone. Like it ceased being interesting to his wife. Like he and his daughter
Just became annoying.
Found it really interesting because they were like, what is this? And so Stuart and I joked that every married couple has one of each, that like some of my earliest UFO experiences were with my wife, but she was just sort of like, I don't know what bin to file this under, and I have stuff to do. And so like, it's funny, like society is kind of made of these two different groups, right? You have the people that are very, very good at getting stuff done. It goes back to that explore-exploit trade-off. There are some people that are very efficient, very good at staying on a to-do list. They run the world. And then you have the artists and the people who are brilliant, but they can't get funding. You have people that are highly creative because their brains are very noisy. They're easily distracted, but they're paying more attention to the stuff in the periphery.
Right.
you know? And like the question is, how do you get these two people that have completely different heuristics? They have different values for what qualifies as a worthy, you know, like is something worth pursuing or not? And the lateral thinking weirdos are the ones that tend to make the observations that precipitate scientific revolutions, but they you know, they have a hard time like I am late every single month to file my invoice for contract work. Because it's just like, I don't, you know, like you hear people like stories of like the Claude Shannon who invented information theory, and how when he was at Bell Labs, he never, like he forgot to cash his checks. You know, like they're just like so preoccupied with like, you know, chasing the ambulance.
I think it's good to have a spouse that is like different than you in that sense. It keeps you balanced, keeps you from basically like losing your footing, right? It keeps you from falling down the slippery slope.
Yes. So Nikki, I love you.
It's healthy.
Thank you.
So when did you start having these kinds of experiences?
My first UFO experiences were as a kid. But then they became pronounced as an adult after I got out of college. And it's interesting because like, you know, there's a through line in the parapsychological research literature and in lore, in like, you know, going back hundreds of years, stories of poltergeists and other weird sort of haunting phenomena that concentrate in the homes of emotionally disturbed teenagers or people that are like at points in their life where they're in an epistemic crisis. They're in a crisis about like, what do I do with my life? You know, who am I? What is this? There may be trauma involved.
Yes.
And it's these moments where the story has been disrupted. What my, Doug Rushkoff, another big inspiration of mine, calls it narrative collapse. These moments, you know, like the 30 Years' War, or like what we're going through right now with disinformation in the post-truth era, where, again, like it's like the internet is a psychedelic that is operating on all of human civilization at one time. Like rather than you take acid, actually, let me show you this, Tech Ethics as Psychedelic Parenting is the talk I gave a few years ago.
You're a very fast Googler.
Oh, thanks.
It's incredible.
So let's see. Yeah, here's a slideshow. Got it. Where do I? Oh, yeah. So this is from that famous LSD the psilocybin functional connectivity study that was done in London, where this is, you know, the graph on the left is your brain in an ordinary waking state, and the graph on the right is the functional connectivity between crosstalk between brain regions after eating psilocybin mushrooms. And then you look at something like this, and this is the map of the World Wide Web taken a few years apart. And you see the same kind of thing, like as our information architecture develops on the planet, it's doing something to human systems that looks like what psychedelics are doing to the brain.
Whoa.
And so like the fact that we live in a post-truth era is like at planet scale what's going on in your own brain when you're tripping, and you don't know how far something is, like you lose your
footing.
You lose your reality story. And so so there's, you know, this is really, I have always considered, for reasons that include the fact that like the evolution of computing technology, the evolution of biotechnology, the evolution of entertainment media, and the evolution of psychedelics as a technology over the last 150 years are basically the same story. You know, like Doug Engelbart, who was at ARPA and a principal player in the foundation of personal computing and the internet, was a member of the Institute for Advanced Studies LSD trials in 1955. You know, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak both took acid famously as they were developing the Apple computer.
Yeah.
You know, you go back and, you know, the Kary Mullis, who Diana Paschulka's talked about, you know, like we have DNA lab techniques to produce DNA. We have the polymerase chain reaction for which he won the Nobel Prize because he was a psychonaut. And so there is this weird thing that this is another piece of, my fondness. The reason I tell you should fund noonautics is because it's arguable that most of the modern scientific world that we live in is owed to these experiences that people are having, like even Rene Descartes, okay? Like what we think of as like the paragon of rational secular thinking. The Cartesian plane came from a fever dream that he had. I think it was in the Prussian War. I can't remember the exact war, but he was a foot soldier and he caught a fever and had this dream where an angel came to him and gave him the Cartesian plane and said, use this to conquer nature, basically. And like, you've got Kekulé and the benzene ring and like all of these famous scientific breakthrough aha moments, Newton wrote more on astrology and alchemy than he did on calculus and physics, and so like there is this weird intertwingling between our engagement with mysterious intelligences or kinds of intelligence in nature, where our great ideas come from, and the development of the like thinking about biological processes as digital, or thinking about the digital computer and the brain as being kind of related phenomena, information theory as something about systems that compute. And so anyway, like it's just funny to me that like the internet being a psychedelic substance, and then people having these psychedelic experiences where they realize that computation can be embodied in analog carbon-based systems. It's all kind of connected.
Kary Mullis, he's interesting. Am I thinking about the same person? Is Kary Mullis the guy who had like the huge rift with Anthony Fauci?
I don't. Oh God. Yeah. I think he. Yeah. There was a whole thing. In his later years.
I remember watching a video of him just basically shitting on Fauci, like in the '90s or something.
Yeah. I think Kary is one of these people that ended up saying some stuff that made him look kind of bad. Later on, kind of the same way, Michael Crichton became a climate change denier toward the end of his life, and famously said some kind of really unfortunate stuff.
Wikipedia, I'm sure they have a very accurate depiction of Kary Mullis, American biochemist, in recognition of his role in the invention of the polymerase chain reaction technique. He shared
polymerase. Yeah.
Oh, that's what he won the Nobel Prize for. Oh,
right.
He shared the 1993 Nobel Prize in chemistry with Michael Smith. Awarded the Japan Prize in the same year. PCR became a central technique in biochemistry and molecular biology, described by the New York Times as highly original and significant, virtually dividing biology into two epochs, before the PCR and after the PCR. Huh.
But yeah, he was an HIV AIDS denier and all this stuff. Yeah.
Oh, he was a denier.
Yeah, well,
What did he say about
he
it?
expressed doubt that HIV was the cause of AIDS. But like, no, so this is an interesting case. Like they call it Nobel disease, right? Which is like where you get recognized as being an expert in something. Like, for instance, Neil deGrasse Tyson, is a brilliant astronomer who comes out and then says stuff about how philosophy is inferior to science, without realizing that like all of scientific knowledge depends on philosophy. And it's just like, dude, you're stay in your lane. I have no lane, so I'm an expert in nothing.
You have many lanes.
I have,
You have no lanes and infinite lanes.
I should not be, I hope that I'm merely pointing people to authoritative sources and not professing to be one. But this happens a lot, and people get asked, they become known as experts. And it's because we have this really impoverished understanding of expertise that we think, oh, somebody's an expert, so we can ask them anything, and they're just smarter than I am, and that's not the case.
Right.
Collective intelligence is fundamental. But yeah, the
Your UFO experiences.
What about them?
Your first one was when you were how old? 9
or 10.
And what was it you saw?
I saw like an orb, a kind of metallic orb floating in the sky with an equatorial belt of like rainbow lights. And the lights were kind of rotating around it. And then I was in the backseat of a car and trying to get my parents' attention. And by the time they turned around, it was gone.
Where were you?
Orlando.
Wow. 2 hours from here.
Yeah. And then the most recent one I saw was outside of San Marcos, Texas, and probably a human craft. Like if I'm gonna place a bet on something, it was about 20 feet wide, triangular object with green lights on each wingtip and flatter than it could be to keep a person inside of it. But it was floating about 100 feet off the ground over a crowd of 300 people. It was observed multiply by me and a bunch of my friends on the ground. And we watched it for about a minute, and it floated upwind over the crowd and the stage until it was over the tree line. We couldn't see it anymore. But the wind was clearly blowing in the opposite direction, and it was going upwind at about the speed of the wind, maybe 5 miles an hour.
What do you think it is about people? I think it's so funny that people that have UFO experiences have many of them. I've never found anyone who's just like seen one UFO and it ended there. Like they all have multiple experiences and a history of experiences from childhood on.
Yeah, I mean, that was a question that Stuart Davis pursued in his podcast, "An Aliens and Artists." He talked to hundreds of observers, and one of the patterns that they all had in common was that it was heritable. That there seemed to be some sort of thing where it's like, my mom has seen them and her mom and like the story kind of changes over time. It's like 200 years ago, my parents were talking about fairies.
Right.
But it's this, you look at the kind of coarse features of this thing and it's the same over generations. And so, yeah, again, it gets to this question about human cognition, right? And like, another thing that's heritable, I have some friends in common with Josh Schrei. He's the host of the Emerald podcast, also out of Santa Fe. Mm-hmm. And Josh just did a really spectacular 2-episode feature on seers through societies over time and how, things like the Delphic Oracle, right, in ancient Greece, or in, the medicine people in various tribal groups across the planet, that seers have been held through most cultures over time as having a special suite of cognitive faculties that make them usefully different as navigators of stuff that is not really well understood or known to everyone else. And that, in our effort to squelch, stamp out various pre-modern superstitions in the modern era, like for instance, the pharmacological research is coming around to validating in its own way with its own methods a lot of the supposedly BS, witchcraft style, like herbal medicine. A lot of these folk traditions were correct in their understanding that certain kinds of herbs work for certain kinds of ailments. And we just drowned all those people or burned them. And now we're coming back around to like, okay, wait a minute. And I think something like that is happening right now with, let me give you an example here. I love this paper that just came out this weekend. This hallucination is inevitable, an innate limitation of large language models, where they basically say that this feature of language models, which is that, generative tools will produce stuff that's just really weird. Like we can't iron out, like certain, like if you prompt Chat GPT and then it gives you some sort of BS response, like, they warn you got to fact check this stuff. You can't just assume that GPT is telling you the truth.
Right.
So it's like it turns out that this paper makes the case that something like that is We're never going to completely get rid of hallucination in machine learning.
What is the Google one called again?
Gemini.
Gemini, yeah. That's Gemini what you look like. You'll look like a 600-pound black woman.
Yeah, there's all of that. Yeah. So again, like it's, what has a given inference algorithm been trained on? And that's
So fucking weird, man.
In that respect, this notion that goes back to like, Roland Fisher and all of these people in the middle of the 20th century, that consciousness is basically sense constrained, what we think of as the waking mind, not consciousness in the way that like the non-dual traditions use it, which is ontologically prior to mental activity. But that mind is, the waking life is sense-constrained dreaming. It's sense-constrained hallucination. And so that's what they're saying with these language models is that, so like what's interesting about this with respect to Josh Schrey and Sears and so on is that, again, we want to combine low noise and high noise systems as complementary in our efforts to try and understand the world. And so, to the extent that somebody like Gregory Bateson said, information is the difference that makes a difference. It's like we're actually doing ourselves, like you were saying earlier about creativity, like the human creative process and machine learning, and how like if we go too far down this route of just eating and constantly regurgitating and then re-eating these, the generative media goes back into tuning the language models, and then we end up further and further down the hole of our training biases.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like we can use language models the way that the ancient Greeks used the Delphic oracle, or like the way that you can cast the I Ching or read the tarot or read tea leaves or whatever. It's about injecting randomness into a system so that you are knocking yourself out of the rut of being overfit on the reality model that you're using at any given time. And so like what excites me about a lot of the really savvy people that have been talking about AI for years, like Kevin Kelly, who I've had on the show 3 times. He's the founding editor of Wired magazine and a brilliant technologist. And he was saying, even as far back as the 90s, that trying to reproduce the human mind with AI is not interesting because we already have human minds, and that what's actually really interesting is finding kinds of inference or kinds of intelligence that are meaningfully distinct from our own. That like we're like, the AI, we are making alien minds that can tell us something about us that we don't already know, in the way that like learning to communicate with dolphins, for instance, is going to radically expand our view of the world. And so like, again, like, when it comes to SETI, there's like 3 stances. There's, let's look out into space for life. There's let's look into our own phenomenal experience with psychedelics. And then there's this other thing which is going on with groups like the Interspecies Internet, Interspecies.io, which is like co-founded by Vint Cerf and Peter Gabriel. It's a fascinating project.
What is it about?
It's about using machine learning to create a translation layer between humans and non-humans. So like learning to communicate with dolphins and apes and corvids and other kinds of creature with AI, so that you have, like the like in Up, the dog's got the translation collar.
Yeah.
That stuff is like an inch away from us right now.
Really?
I was going to have Karen Bacher on the show. Karen passed away last year tragically, but she was a brilliant eco-acoustician.
What is the name of this?
Interspecies.io. But yeah, Karen worked on using machine learning. She wrote a book called The Sounds of Life, about using machine learning to decode the communication of everything from like whales and turtles to coral. Whoa. It turns out like all kinds of life use sound to communicate that we didn't even realize until just a couple years ago. And so, yeah, there's this whole explosive field right now of ecoacoustics empowered by AI, so that, like within a very short time, we're going to be talking to all kinds of non-human animals. And then we have an ethical question about like whether we should, whether it's responsible for us to, there are issues of like informed consent. Like, should we really be giving Should we really be like in the position to sell dolphins Instagram ads and stuff like that? That seems like a really bad idea because it's like they're like children. Like they don't like should you really let your kids just watch YouTube without parental supervision? No. And anyway, so this is. I just love the idea of like, oops, it turns out that, we thought that AI was going to be good for like missile guidance and stuff like this. The real feature of AI, the really interesting thing that it's going to turn out to be most useful for is helping us reconnect to this more sort of diverse relationship to mind and intelligence that makes our explorations of the cosmos inherently plural. Like the last thing I think I pulled up that I wanted to show you is this talk I gave a couple years ago about pluralism, and it gets back to this. There's a ton of good links in here. A 6-minute talk on all of the different ways that people independently decided that pluralism was the correct basis for asking deep questions about reality. And so like like there's a ton on the table right now. Like what we stand to learn if we do manage to kind of like reliably open discourse with different forms of non-human intelligence, be they terrestrial organisms, be they machine intelligences, be they, interdimensional ET type things or whatever. Every new, there's like, I guess like the way to put it is like the term alien has not always meant the same thing, right? Like there are people that call people crossing the border through Mexico aliens.
Right.
Alien just means beyond the horizon of my own sense of self, right? It's an adjective that we apply to the things that are exotic to our own understanding of the world. And so alien used to mean people living 5 miles away from you. And maybe in another 100 years, alien will mean, something that currently lies so far beyond the scope of our comprehension. We will not consider, the octopus to be an alien form of intelligence anymore, because we will have been brain linked to octopi through, brain-computer interfaces for 100 years. So it'll seem like your neighbor, in like the latent space of possible minds.
That's crazy to think about. Imagine, even if the work that the interspecies IO people are doing with using these models to decipher animal communication. Imagine if we were able to somehow link the minds of people from different parts of the world, like different countries, and like I just think imagine how that would upset the balance of nations around the world if it wasn't just like, if you don't just have like these people at the very top of the pyramid communicating with each other and then the people below are just sort of like are just passive, right? If this thing becomes ubiquitous and people like you and me are able to tap into what people are thinking and communicate with, people in other cultures that speak different fucking languages around the world, I wonder how that would change the global balance and how that would make when you think about superpowers and military might, like how that would make that obsolete, maybe in a way, because
we're in the middle of it. So 189 at Future Fossils, I interviewed Parag Khanna, who's kind of a best-selling futurist author. I used to write for his blog at bigthink.com. And he's spent a ton of time on this question. This book that he and I discussed about a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago now. Move, yeah, The Forces Uprooting Us. He's talking about how the increasingly interconnected global economy is dissolving national borders, and a lot of what we see as this sort of counter force where people are like, nationalism is having kind of a moment right now, but it's because the actual larger historical trend is in the other direction. And I am I'm not as unrepentant a globalist as Parag Khanna is, because I also see the way that that as boundaries collapse, things become more and more unstable and unpredictable. And it's not at all clear to me that we're moving into something that can be simply described as like a kind of global system. Like the internet, like everyone's pulling out of social media because it's not safe anymore. Like the way that there was a UC Santa Barbara study on fisheries, on mass capture fishing a few years ago, showing that as we've gotten better and better at net trawling large schools of fish have evolved to be smaller because they avoid the attention of these fisheries because they're swimming in smaller groups. They're not. It's a diminishing marginal return on fishing cost. And so something like that is happening right now in the surveillance economy, where people are sick of being preyed upon in these enormous herds of willing flesh online, and are pulling out, and the new social media experience is one that's much more like campfire scale than global scale. And so as forces pull in other directions, right? Opposite directions all the time. But the point that Parag was making was that as things have become more and more globalized, voluntary military participation has dropped profoundly. That people
voluntary
young people no longer want to join the army because they no longer identify as national citizens on average as much as they used to. They no longer have a fealty to, a given country. They have on average more of a fealty to being of a particular generation.
Yes.
Or identifying as global citizens. My buddy Sam Barton, who is a dear friend of mine. Let's see, what was that? Sam Barton, global citizen. He's working on a project, Global Citizenship. Global Citizens United is a project he's working on with a few people to try and kind of advance this notion of global citizenship from the bottom up. And so, there are these, Parag talks about there being, we have a moral imperative to open our borders more because, the demographic shifts in the population are making it so that we're going to run out of elder care. Like Japan is already struggling, large parts of Europe are already struggling with replacement. And so people are running out of, options for domestic labor and for the care of the elderly and this kind of thing. And so we're going to have to, a society needs new blood in it. And if our reproductive rates continue to drop because of the systems dynamics of the demographic shift into urban living, then we're going to have to replace that not with children from a given country, but from immigrant movement.
That's a good point. That this guy, I was listening to a podcast with John Mearsheimer and Lex Friedman had him on. The guy's incredible. He was talking about that specifically in regards to immigration from Mexico and South America, and how important it is that, and also I think from Asian countries, that a huge chunk, I think more than ever, of young people that are currently reproducing, the people that reproduce the most, that are immigrants from those countries, that are replenishing our population and keeping it from declining. And if it wasn't for all that immigration, our population would be plummeting at a way larger rate.
Yeah, Parag's observation is that we are actually, a lot of people think about this sort of hockey stick exponential curve, but most complex systems have a negative feedback built into them somewhere, where you actually get what they call a sigmoidal curve, which is S-shaped, and you reach carrying capacity, and then things check that. So it's not that we're gonna, most people with a basis in ecology are less concerned about a system doing some sort of insane thing where it just, this is a complicated topic, but there's the best perhaps introduction I can think of to this topic is the conversation I just had with physicist Jeffrey West and ecologist evolutionary biologist Manfred Laubicler. And they look at this innovation, technological innovation, and they say basically, like we were talking about earlier about like innovating, like discovering new energy resources or new material resources for manufacturing, and that it creates a crisis. It exports some new kind of externality, some kind of new kind of waste, and or it exports, in making a system more predictable and more controllable, you export chaos and disorder. And then that chaos and disorder doesn't just disappear forever. It eventually comes back and bites you in the ass. And so you can look at the history of technological innovation as a history of constantly kicking this catastrophe a little further down the road, but that the crisis comes back even faster as the systems become more and more complex and unpredictable because they're generating more and more novelty. And so West talks about the finite time singularity, which is this moment that we can no longer adapt with new innovations at the pace of the new kinds of disorder that we have to understand, predict, control, manage. And so, at that point, West is predicting, something like the collapse of civilization. But one of the things that we get into in this conversation is how it may be actually that we just kind of hit a wall and that things don't collapse, that they kind of just taper off. And so, Parag says the same kind of thing. He's like, what were we thinking? That there are all of these checks and balances that come in, like people can't afford to have kids. So like reproduction does not just continue to grow exponentially forever. You get to a point where you can't afford a house and you can't afford having 3 kids. And like, that's the millennial experience, right? The millennial experience is we're actually starting to make choices where we're not just mindlessly pursuing an exponential growth curve anymore. The
What do you mean mindlessly pursuing?
Well, the assumption that we're just going to keep growing forever. Like eventually, a bacterial culture growing in a petri dish hits the wall of the dish.
Oh, okay.
And so like this notion that comes from the Club of Rome limits to growth, like this famous paper in the 1970s, talking about limits to growth. It's like the assumption that that's going to hitting a limit to growth or overshooting a limit to growth necessarily results in some sort of universal catastrophic collapse is not necessarily the case. It's a question of the different scales at which all of these different things are unfolding, the different time scales at which they're unfolding. So, I don't know. I guess, we're kind of on a weird bender here, but I think that much like the collapse of unification in the sciences doesn't necessarily mean that we give up on the quest for consilience in our knowledge. It doesn't mean that we, the printing press comes out and then we go back to the Stone Age. It's like, no, we hit a new plateau, and then it takes some time for us to figure out how to grow beyond that plateau. I don't know. These are very complex questions, but I don't think that we are. I don't think that we are necessarily at a point where on one side of the curve, we all go up into space and live forever. And on the other side, the only other possibility is that we end up bombing ourselves back to the Stone Age. Like there's definitely a third thing in there.
Probably a few different things in the middle there.
Yeah.
Back to your UFO stories. What other kind of experiences? Did you have any other kind of experiences other than seeing objects in the sky? Did you have any encounters with beings or anything?
Oh yeah, for sure.
For sure.
Yeah. But again, okay, let me just bracket this by saying that I believe in maintaining a kind of skeptical humility about all of the weird experiences that I've had, I've had enough of them to find them interesting and worthy of serious pursuit. You know, a genuine effort to try and understand something. But I think that, you know, anyone who believes that they know what's going on has failed, whether they believe on the side of, you know, this does not exist, or on the side of like, this does exist and I know what's going on. And in fact, one of the more interesting pieces of writing I've seen on this is, again, by my buddy Stuart Davis, who wrote a piece on the phenomenon as control system or developmental driver, where he says, this piece, advanced, well, I should proceed. You know, where he says, you know, is the UFO phenomenon and sort of all these related parapsychological phenomena, maybe, like, does it maybe exist?
Gene.
This, Game is a song of his. He loves exploring the shadow, the psychological shadow in his work. But he writes this piece where he basically asks, is the UFO a kind of deception that is, you know, malevolent? Like, you know, are we being controlled by an intelligence greater than our own that's preying on us in some way? Or is it a call forward into a higher logical order? Like, is the fact that these things are so hard to define, or that they seem so elusive or slippery, you know, that they escape our attempts to nail them down into, you know, an easy kind of category? Is this perhaps actually the feature? Again, like, is this not a bug of what we're observing, but is this actually the point that we're being called to reconstitute our cosmology at a higher logical order that is not merely sort of a duality, a dualistic kind of thinking? And the last thing I'd say on that, before we go back to story time, about my UFO experiences, is that I talked about this with Sean Esbjørn Hargens, my graduate advisor on future fossils, and we spend a lot of time, you know, kind of, he looks at how 200 different cultures and academic disciplines have investigated the UFO phenomenon and the conclusions that they've come to. And one of the things that he basically says is that, you know, the through line on all of this stuff is that, you know, Jacques Vallée talks about this and many others, that the through line is that it seems to be, Carl Jung wrote about this, if we can say anything about this phenomenon, it's that it interrogates the modern boundary between the mind and the rest of reality. And that, you know, that there seems to be a sense in which the horizon of our understanding is on this sort of, you know, the psychophysical nature of things. And so, you know, how can we do better science, you know, with a kind of like interior SETI, you know, a noenotic SETI? How can we do science that helps us adapt the philosophy of science to a networked digital era? Like, how can we update the philosophical underpinnings of scientific inquiry so that we can adequately deal with issues of mind-matter complementarity, or of the challenges in reproducibility for psychological experiments and so on? And so with all of that said, you know, there is a sort of sense in which these experiences pollute or challenge or compromise our attempts at objective material description. And so, like, one of the things that I've decided I'm just not going to bother doing is to try and claim that any of my experiences should convince someone to believe in this stuff.
Right.
But, you know, with that said, like, I was in Peru in 2011 for ayahuasca ceremony, and in a really unusual situation where the 17 of us that went down together were all separated and led through our ayahuasca ceremonies as a kind of initiatic ordeal alone, like intentionally separated from one another rather than in a more kind of traditional circle, you know, ceremony setting. And all 17 of us, separated and out of contact with one another through ceremony, all saw these weird sort of mantis-like black chrome kind of aliens that appeared to us each individually. And the next morning we all came back and we were like, oh, you saw that too? Like what? And in my case, these beings that, you know, kind of ran through the whole kind of classic gamut of behavior, including, you know, psychic surgery on you. Like, you know, they're like opening up your energy body and operating on your subtle energy systems or whatever. So I had that experience, and I had the experience of,
How old were you when you did that?
27. Wait, yes, 27. 2011. This was the week before the Fukushima reactor collapse. We came back to civilization. Like, we came out of the jungle and went to a hostel outside of Puerto Maldonado. And the first thing we saw on TV was the coverage of the reactor meltdown. And we were like, oh, because like the whole thing was like, you know, it's like you go through the experience, but then the work really starts when you get back.
Right.
And so like that was the joke on us, was we were like, oh God.
Introduction back into the real world.
Oh God, right. We live in the world, you know, now, you know, where is the boundary, you know, because cesium-137's in your tuna. But like, you know, so that's another weird thing about this phenomenon, right? Is the intense correlation between the UFO phenomenon and nuclear technology. You know, and I know you've talked with a ton of people about this on the show, and the intense curiosity that these unidentifiable craft appear to have about nuclear missile stations and so on. But like, so yeah, there's something really curious about that. But like the beings that I saw in ceremony that year were trying to explain to me. I mean, again, like this is the subjective experience I had of this, was that they appeared to me out of nowhere, and I was like, so how are you here? You know, what is this? How are you showing up to me right now? Like, are you, you know? And what they were saying was that that there are different substrates on which life can emerge, or from which life can emerge. And that biochemistry, organic biochemistry is one of them, but organic biochemistry represents a specific stratum of temperature and pressure at which life can occur, and that life can occur at other pressures in other states of matter. And that their form of life occurs in plasmas that are, you know, they're like ionized gases that are so hot and so electrically charged that organic life cannot develop from them, but that they can generate basically like magnetic holograms, and that the kinds of interactions that are necessary for life can emerge out of the substrate of those holograms. And so they were basically like, well, you actually have this too, like the you know, the living biological systems on the planet as we conventionally understand them all have this energetic component, which is, you know, if you look at the work of like Irvin Laszlo or Rupert Sheldrake or some of these other people that have been trying to understand a new biology, a lot of them, you know, puzzle into the relation of electromagnetism and you know, quantum vacuum holograms and so on in these kind of more non-local and seemingly predictive biological dynamics. But the thing about they were saying is like, well, we have like a material body. It's just that our material body is plasma, and you have you have like a plasma body, but that's not where evolution has tuned your attention, or has tuned your organization as and the encapsulation or the incarnation of an inference, a model of its environment. Like, you live on a slow, cool planet, and so the focal point for you as a living system is on this the the material, the chemical substrate, whereas we are too hot for chemistry, but we are holograms made out of the magnetic interactions of heavy metals at the center of the galaxy. And so like we can appear to you through the nonlinear interactions of, our sort of subtle body and yours. But this is where we don't occupy time and space in the same way that you do because of, the fact that our experience is centered on a different, the emergent interactions of a different phase of matter. I was like, oh, okay. All right, cool.
Noted.
Yeah, noted. So like, but they were basically like, look, there's nothing supernatural about this. There's nothing, this is the same physics that you have. This is the same, substrate for biology on a very general level, but like you can't, like your eyeball would dissolve instantaneously if you tried to like actually physically co-locate with us. And, the only way that we're able to appear to you is kind of like remotely through this spooky action at a distance or whatever.
Did it seem like they were far more advanced than we are technologically?
I mean,
or
what is technology?
More enlightened than we were? Were they a superior being to us? Can this communication happen in the reversal role? Like, can they somehow experience us in the same way you experience them?
I mean, so I
don't know if you had time to ask this question.
Yeah, I wonder about. I mean, technology again. I tend to think of things in a very, very general way, where like one of my favorite papers is this piece, Multiple Paths to Multiple Life. My friend Chris Kempis led a few years ago. And there's a great, let me see if I can find this figure in this paper. Oh yeah, where they're talking about like, we tend to think at layer one here, life as a space of material possibilities. But then there's layer two, which is a space of physical constraints. And then there's layer three, which is a space of optimization principles. And so, like this is a space where, you have convergence on certain, like information theorists are going to argue that life could exist as, like the blockchain might be alive, or a national constitution might be alive, or memes might be alive. And memes, like Jacob Foster, the friend of mine who co-leads the Diverse Intelligence's Summer Institute, gave a great presentation a couple years ago on death metal as a kind of parasitic organism that exists on the substrate of human brains. He was just giving death metal as a joke example, but like ideas are information patterns that propagate from one human brain or human mind to another. And so there's a sense in which you can argue that, something like a god in a more kind of modern information theoretical sense is a pattern of neural firing activity and behavioral activity that we see in like entire groups of human beings and in our relationship to each other through various technological media. And so, like Batman, this is something I talk about with Sean in that episode 150 of Future Fossils, that like, this is like Neil Gaiman and American Gods, like this story about, what are gods really? Gods are ideas that people have and enact through their behavior. So like Batman is like a thing. Batman has a physical footprint of merchandise and, the information of like Batman movies stored on Netflix servers and like this kind of stuff. And so that's a thing. That's a thing that exists in space and time in the way that philosopher Timothy Morton, who's at Rice University with Jeff Kripal, Tim Morton calls them hyperobjects. It's like it's so big that we can't really see it as a single thing. Like climate change is a thing, but it's a hyperobject that we're embedded in. And so we can only catch glimpses of it. And like the UFO might be a hyperobject. It might be something that exists in some weird way, both kind of beyond us and inside of us, and that we're sitting here like scratching our silly monkey heads trying to make sense of it.
Yeah.
But that it's there. It's there in the way that that Christianity is, that like Christ, historically, who knows, may have been a physical person, but Christ is definitely a real thing.
Yes.
In that
Yes.
there enough people believe in Christ, and Christ influences their relation, their actual behavior in the world. And so like what is what is an idea? What is a technology? What is what is life? And are we basically ideas that are are we like memes that like 19th century natural history illustrator Ernst Haeckel, who's like the legendary science illustrator of all time. There's a great documentary about his work called Proteus, where he talks a lot about his study of biological form as a study of the ideas in the mind of God, as kind of like Platonic, like that physical, like biological organisms and like the various forms that we see in nature throughout the tree of life are like ideas that God is having, and that, God's brain is like physical reality and so on. And I think that's just a really elegant, beautiful system for the contemplation of transcendent, weird notions. But I don't know how to answer your question about like, are they more or less advanced? Because, I don't know.
Have you, every time you experienced things like this, was it all under the influence of things like ayahuasca or psilocybin or things like that? Or
No, I definitely had sober. But I mean, again, like what is what is sobriety,
What is
right?
sobriety?
What is sobriety? Because your brain...
It's a hyper object.
Well, like, McKenna's talked about this, and so has, Salvador Dali said, I don't do drugs, I am drugs. Like the modern molecular biochemical approach to human cognition is that you are made out of psychoactive substances.
Yeah.
So like what is sober? Like you can't get away from being under the influence of something any more than...
Whether it's endogenous chemicals or
Right.
exogenous chemicals, right?
Right. So
Or bags of chemicals walking around.
right. So
And
you
we're
have
never in a constant state.
totally. You just have, one kind of intoxication that people take for granted as normal versus other kinds that are less normal and perhaps less socially interoperable, right? Like, you're going to have trouble feeding yourself if you're Ramana Maharshi and you're in a kind of advanced meditative state all the time, and so you don't have a perception of your ego. Like, was that Jill Bolte Taylor who had my stroke of genius? She had a left hemispheric stroke. She has a famous TED talk about it, like that she had a kind of a non-dual samadhi. She had a moment of awakening where her boundary around herself dissolved, and she didn't experience herself as separate from the cosmos. But she also kept forgetting to call 911 because she was just like so like captivated by everything that she forgot that she was in the middle of an emergency. So again, like there's got to be some kind of utility to certain kinds of intoxication that allow us to to see things differently. But there's a reason that there are probably fewer artists per capita than there are bankers or whatever. Like on average, we need to remember that, we have to remember to eat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's similar to Jeff Kripal wrote a book, Changed in a Flash. I don't know if you heard of that one, but it's about this lady, Elizabeth Crone, I think her name was. She got struck by lightning. And then she basically like recounts this whole experience of like after she got struck by lightning, she was going to church with her kids. She went inside the church to get a doctor, and it was what's it called? It was a Jewish church, so it was full of doctors.
Synagogue,
yeah. And they were all doctors, and they all came and helped her. And then she turned around to go back outside, and she saw herself laying there on the floor, on the ground, like dead. And then she followed some light into some other garden she explained she saw, and then she purposely didn't follow the light. She was in this garden communicating with her dead grandfather for like 2 weeks straight, and then she decided to go back into her previous body or previous space-time, and then she recounts all of this, and then she had like all these precognitive abilities after this, and she was able to predict things, or like knew people were going to die the day before they died, and all this crazy stuff, and you know, all these, I see just like such a pattern between some of these UFO experiences and these near-death experiences, and it makes me like curious to whether, you know, when it even comes to people like Whitley Strieber or Chris Bledsoe, like all this stuff is just inside you. Maybe not, it may not be external.
Well, it may just not be that, you know, inside you means what we think it means.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's, you know, this room is inside you in some sense. You know, like, again, like this is why I love the methodological pluralist approach to this stuff. It's like, okay, in one sense of the word inside, this stuff is arising in your awareness. And in another sense of the word inside, you're sitting in the room where this is happening. And those are two different ways. You know, we're using the same word, but they mean two very different things. And, you know, so I think a lot of what we're dealing with right now is a demand for the evolution of our language. You know, that like what we're going to, you know, in the same way that my interest in all of this stuff kind of arguably came out of reading a paper about where syntax comes from.
That's where it all started?
Yeah, the evolution of syntactic language. This paper led by Martin Nowak.
Your recall of all these podcasts that you've recorded and all these papers that you've read is astounding.
Thanks. Yeah, gobble nootropics, folks. That's just,
gobble crowd them. And
yeah, but so this piece, Nowak and Plotkin. Krakauer worked on this one too, but he's got a couple on the evolution of language and of syntactic communication. Oh, here we go. Oh, look at that. Henry G. worked on this episode of this issue of Nature, my buddy Henry. Anyway, so they talk about syntax and the sentence being something that emerged out of a similar kind of catastrophic threshold in information production in early human society, like hominid society, where the complexity of society meant that we had suddenly, you know, exponentially more things to communicate to one another that mattered to the cohesion of our behavioral coordination. And so our language, which at the time was built on individual utterances, where like we didn't have sentences yet. We had things like chair, you know, or like good, you know, and there was no real, you know, there was no way to articulate things into longer, more complex ideas.
That's the way a toddler communicates.
Right. And then at some point, you get to a level of social complexity where you need to remember more words than you can, basically. And so at that point, we go from a dynamic where you learn by adding new words to a dynamic where you come up with a handful of simple rules where those words can be combined to mean exponentially more things than you can actually remember. And so like this has implications to the origin of life, because what we're talking about and what my friend Sarah Walker, who's a NASA funded astrobiologist at ASU, talks about, that life is basically life can be defined as the processes whereby systems generate a greater possibility space than the actual space of things that can happen. So like, you know, the notion that we are evolving into a deeper and deeper embrace of imagination and possibility is actually like fundamental to what it means to be alive and what it means to be intelligent. You know, when like people talk about life as being, you know, like highly improbable, you know, like the number of ways that you can put molecules together to make something, and only some of them will actually lead to a reproducing cell. and vastly more of them won't. And the question of like, well, how is it that we did this? The famous sort of critique of, it's like a junkyard blowing, a tornado blowing through a junkyard and assembling a working 747. It's like, it's actually substantially worse than that. But you have people like my buddy Bruce Damer, or like the quantum biologist John Joe McFadden at the University of Surrey, who have interesting arguments for basically not only life being, seemingly circumventing enormous improbability, but being inevitable because the grain of our cosmos is toward an expansion of what complex system scientist Stuart Kauffman calls the adjacent possible. That you keep coming to these crisis points in information management in both pre-biological, biological, and sort of trans or post-biological systems. And the solution is to invent a new syntax, a new order for articulating and recombining the parts that allow us to model the cosmos with adequate complexity in order to continue surviving in it. And so, so like this notion of us being at a point now in the history of the planet where subject-verb-object syntax is no longer adequate to describing the reality of our experience, such that we can say things like, I am in the room and the room is in me, and for it to make sense intuitively rather than it to sound like a nonsense statement. Right. There's a video on that folks can find on my YouTube, how to resolve a paradox. Where, then this is something that was communicated to me in a UFO experience, actually, in 2006, where they said, look, if you like say you have a card, and on one side of the card it says the statement on the opposite side of this card is false. But then you turn the card around, and on the other side of the card it says the same thing. So they can't both be right? Right? Oh, no, but they can, because you can spin the card. And so you can assign a relative truth value to these seemingly contradictory statements by adding a dimension of time or a dimension of physical space where those things can oscillate. And that kind of oscillation is one of the core characteristics of a hyperobject as defined by Timothy Morton. So like reality is a hyperobject, and we gain more and more adequately high dimensional understandings or models of reality by adding more dimensions and more perspectives to our understanding, which is exactly what we were talking about with like, what is science? Science is an open-ended process whereby more and more seemingly contradictory dimensions are unified at the level of our understanding and our world models. And so that actually exceeds like a third-person confirmation. Like really, I think like the new form of science that we're going to stabilize at, in the coming decades, is a science that is comfortable with the complementarity of both quantitative and qualitative evidence streams, and has found some way to unify them in a higher logical order. And so, so it gets, all of the stuff we've been talking about today is like, how do we use systems of numbers and systems of experiences stereoscopically to train our scientific investigations on something that is fundamentally challenging to the idea of mind-matter duality.
Wild shit, dude. Let's watch this video.
I mean, sure, it's kind of... Yeah, this is just me doing a mural on the inside of my buddy's camper, but...
Oh, okay. And you're just talking about this idea while you're doing your mural.
Yeah, I've got a ton of these time-lapse videos online with me going on about one thing or another, philosophical ideas. Oh, this was...
That's incredible. So you said you got that idea in a UFO experience in 2006.
Yeah. Yeah, the second of 4 UFO experiences I had at Clinton Lake outside of the Lawrence, like where I went to school at the University of Kansas.
How did the idea get communicated to you?
Well, it said, like, imagine that, like, we're going to use a geometric analogy to present this to you. They're like, okay, now imagine you have a question.
No, I mean, how is this coming to you? Like,
just showing up in my head while I was looking at this UFO.
You're looking at something, and this is just popping in. These pictures are popping into your head, or words?
Both. And it was like, okay, so like imagine you have a question, and we're going to say that the question is, like the formal logical presentation of this question is as a triangle. The answer to the question is a tetrahedron. You add another point that's off the plane at which you can't understand what you're being asked, and then you're able to observe the two-dimensional plane from the third dimension. And they're like, so the tetrahedron poses a question that can only be answered by a four-dimensional extrapolation from that. And so like all of our physics models are like low dimensional encodings of the actual complexity of reality. And the ability of human beings to cognize a certain number of dimensions is constrained by our evolutionary history, which required us to navigate space-time at a certain level of complexity, right? Like, you don't need to know that there are 11 dimensions because it doesn't matter to you. Kind of, it doesn't matter. But maybe now it's starting to matter. Maybe now we have an existential demand being made on us to understand things at a higher level of dimensionality because our actions are suddenly, they have repercussions that extend into other dimensions. And so, like, there's a great book, Andrew Smith.
This is kind of like what, Steve, you remember what Billy Carson was showing us that video about crystals and the lady that was holding she was holding like the 3D thing and it cast a shadow on the ground of like a 2D shape.
Yeah, it was a really good explanation as well. What was it? It was like ultra crystals or, I forgot the name.
Quasi crystals.
Quasi, yes.
Yeah, so Andrew P. Smith wrote a book about this called The Dimensions of Experience. I want a book club with Future Fossils folks at some point, where he says basically like an ant actually doesn't even experience three spatial dimensions because they're so small, it doesn't matter, and they can like walk on walls and stuff. So they really only experience X and Y. Their experience of physical space is planar. It's not cuboidal. And humans have gotten to a point where humans and birds, like for instance, birds actually have more advanced spatial cognition than humans do because they have to fly. And so they're birds, especially birds that live in forests and other dense areas, have very advanced spatial, like that's why corvids, crows and magpies and so on are so good at like picking locks and stuff is because they have to think in 3D in order to navigate. And that's why humans, we have really good stereoscopic vision, and we can manipulate objects with our hands and so on because we were living in the trees for so long. We had to swing through a kind of dense, complicated, three-dimensional space. And so, like by the time one of the things that years ago, the author of Xenolinguistics, which is like one of the best books on psychedelics and the evolution of language in the world, Diana Reed Slattery. When she was on Eric Davis's show Expanding Mind back in the day, she talked about how like all of human language is based on us living on the surface of a planet under one Earth gravity. And that language would look completely different if it had emerged in zero gravity. Because, you would think of things growing out rather than growing up. They would be growing out uniformly from a point in all directions rather than, like the way that like George Lakoff and Mark Johnson write in this Metaphors We Live By, they write about, we have this relationship in our minds between more is up and then like, a bigger pile of food is like better, or like sitting upright means that you're kind of more, you're maybe a little happier than if you're kind of like slouched over. Right. So there's like there are very, very deep entailments between more is up and up is better that are in our language. So when we talk about the stock market, we talk about it going up when it's performing well. Right. And we talk about it going down when it's not. And like, it's really counterintuitive to try and flip it around. One of the most interesting things about like data visualization and like the presentation of scientific knowledge is the way that we take these things as inherently objective, but they're actually, again, this is the postmodern or linguistic turn in philosophy. It's like we're actually sitting on this incredibly deep substratum of embodied understanding that's coloring everything we take to be objective knowledge. You know, so like, you know, when people talk about getting the cold shoulder, it turns out that social rejection is registered in the brain in the same place that like, you know, like you feel physical pain from social rejection, and it feels cold, and people report themselves as being colder when they're rejected. And there's like a history between like, you're a mammal, you slept in piles. You know, you were like warmer when you were like accepted by your tribe or whatever. So like our language is full of this stuff.
That's fascinating.
And so again, like where, you know, what's inside.
Did you say crows can pick locks?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Not every lock, right? But like, yeah, like there's fantastic crow, let's see, corvid.
Birds are f***ing crazy, man.
Lock picking.
And even like the homing pigeon. Like we still haven't figured out how the homing pigeon.
Oh, it's so strange. Yeah. Let's see. Oh yeah, here you go. Lock picking ravens.
What the fuck?
I mean, and they will work together.
So
too.
how do they do this?
I mean, there are all kinds of experiments into crow, raven, magpie cognition, but they'll work together. Like there are certain locks that you can only pick with two partners working on the same task, and so they will figure it out together.
That's bizarre. And what perception gives them the ability? What, like, how did they evolve to be able to do this? Do people speculate?
I mean, it's, you know, like intelligence is just basically none of us are smarter than we have to be. And none of us are dumber than we need to be, you know? So,
That's a great quote.
That is a great quote. I like that.
So like, I mean, there are statistical deviations, right? Like every once in a while, there's a fluke and like, you know, evolution will cough out something that, you know,
Jack Sarfati.
Yeah, you get weird exceptions, but like on average, but that's because again, like, you know, evolution is itself a noisy process whereby problems are solved, and the problem is the propagation of information through time and through space. And so, like, you know, evolution as a process loves to maintain a diverse investment portfolio. You know, and so you get in any population, you know, you get a kind of reservoir of hedged bets. You know, so like, you know, like in a mature ecosystem, you will have, here's an episode of Complexity I did on this back in COVID where we were talking about mass extinctions being like a market crash. And yeah, I don't host this show anymore, but it's still one of my favorite podcast episodes I've ever.
Why don't you host it anymore? What happened?
Oh, I left SFI last year.
Oh, so this was a podcast. This was somebody else's podcast.
Yeah, this is a show I did for them. But I talk about this on the show on Future Fossils a lot also. This one, let's see, was this the 163? No, it was 161, where we talk about this like market volatility and creativity and play, and how, you know, like basically the noisier a market is, the more it rewards sort of generalist strategies, where like, you know, noisier investment strategies, because the market is noisier, you know, and so like if you specialize, you say like, I'm gonna, you know, in a stable market, you can kind of rely on, you know, a conservative betting strategy, but in an unstable market, and that's what gets back to this, you know, Hunter S. Thompson saying, when the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. You know, because like suddenly you've been the weirdo for your whole life when things were normal, and now they're not normal, you know? Right. And so like there's that classic trope in fiction where it's like, aha, the conspiracy theorist, now civilization has crumbled and like you're the only guy that spent, 150,000 hours watching, how do you survive this kind of stuff? And so suddenly everyone, begrudgingly is like, all right, it's time to listen to Tinfoil Hat Guy.
Right.
But yeah, there are definitely times when it pays to be the contrarian.
Yes.
That's
amazing, man. So you're doing your art, you do the podcast, and then you're also a musician. Are you a solo musician or do you have like a band?
The album I'm releasing right now is a solo album, but it's an album about all of this stuff. It's like,
so you sing about it?
Yeah. It's an album about my UFO encounters and the phenomenology of 5-MeO DMT experience and what it's like to erode the boundaries of selfhood through our immersion in digital technologies and why we should be careful what we wish for when we start connecting our dreaming brains to 3D printers, because then you're going to just print out whatever you're dreaming about. And like, is that really a great idea to smash the boundary between your dream life and physical reality? It's an album called The Age of Reunion, and I play like 20 instruments. And
really,
I recorded it all at home, so it's a sort of uneven production quality, but it's coming out a new track every week until the end of April. It's fun. I've been working on it for 22 years. It was time to get it out.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you still producing it like every day as we speak, or is this stuff that you've already done a long time ago? You're just dripping it out now.
Yeah, I'm on to new stuff. I've been, all of this stuff was stuff that's like it's fun to research this stuff academically, but then it's also fun to inquire through a creative practice. And like for me, electroacoustic music, and in particular taking an acoustic guitar and routing it through a bunch of effects pedals and sampling yourself and remixing yourself is kind of like a garage laboratory for studying cybernetics and evolutionary, kind of processes and like.
Let's hear it. What's it called? Steve, let Steve pull it up. That way he can. He can pipe it through the mixer.
There's look up Transparent on The Age of Reunion on YouTube. It's this one right here. Let me see. This is the latest single. Where is it? This one. It's on my link tree.
You got music videos?
Oh yeah, I did them all with AI. They're fun.
Wow.
This stuff right
Did you see Kanye's new AI music video?
No.
Holy shit, is it amazing?
Is it full of swastikas?
No, it's not full of swastikas.
Thank God.
Oh, well, you got it pulled up. I mean,
yeah, but we can't hear it through the mixer.
You can't hear it on my end.
You can't find it, Steve? Steve's not as good as a Googler as you are.
I'm not showing it to you. There we go. I think I found it.
Yeah. This is the one.
Yeah.
So this is a song.
Oh, what? You send it, go up? So if you buy it, you get this?
No.
I was gonna say.
No,
I
am gonna print this album to vinyl at some point, but I haven't done it yet because it costs a lot of money.
Yeah, I bet.
But yeah, this
Play
is
it.
This is
Where is it?
Play it right there.
Right here. There we go.
Yeah, you should max that full screen.
I love how you did it vertically for an iPhone.
Right. I mean, it's an album about life online, so.
So what AI software did you use to make this?
Oh, this is Kyber.
Kyber.
Kai, yeah.
And it's a video one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Import your music and your lyrics and your prompts.
No shit.
So this is this is a video based on the actual sound and lyrical content.
Did you ask it to go vertical and not widescreen?
Mm-hmm.
And
So I imagine when you imported your voice into this in the beginning, it didn't sound exactly like this. They just like distorted it somehow.
I mean, this is like, I don't know, 6-part harmony or something. I was going for like an H.R. Giger meets Lisa Frank kind of vibe, you know?
Yeah.
Like scary but pretty, because that's the nature of what we're living through right now. It's scary but pretty.
We would be scared if we weren't sharing. We would be scared if we weren't sharing.
Dude, that's fucking crazy. I had no idea that. I didn't know about that AI software that could do this kind of stuff.
Oh, there's tons of it now. I got a lot of friends dabbling in this space.
What's the name of it again? Kyber?
This one is Kyber, yeah. I mean, you can do this with Stable Diffusion. You can do this with, I mean, you know, Adobe's working on consumer grade stuff for this. I actually track state-of-the-art AI stuff now as part of my consulting, and it's moving very fast.
Yeah, it's like beautiful and terrifying at the same time.
I mean, that's the human condition.
That was incredible.
Thanks, man.
So all of your music videos you use AI to make them?
Just recently. I've got a ton of live stuff up on the YouTube as well, and yeah, I mean, I like playing with whatever tools are available. You know, like if you're gonna be the weirdo on the edge of the village, there's like a kind of responsibility to do this stuff, to see what's possible, to report back, you know? So it's just part of that whole sort of overarching gesture of, you know, going to Australia and drawing the platypus, you know?
Yeah. Have you ever heard of Author and Punisher?
Mm-mm.
He does some really cool stuff. Steve, pull up Author and Punisher on YouTube. He doesn't use AI, but he's been doing this for a few years now, where he takes like he has like a warehouse where he has these like industrial machines, and he synthesizes them into this like crazy electronic mix down. It sounds like it sounds like metal industrial, like Apex Twin. It's insane. You find it, Steve? Yeah, watch this. And his fucking videos are wild.
Well, Square Pusher did some stuff like that with like robot orchestra. Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we're talking about in terms of like, you know, technology being a recombinant space where more and more of us are going to be making our own instruments, inventing our own tools to suit whatever kind of creative language we feel. Like one of my favorite artists is Onyx Ashanti, who invented a full body suit that's like his cybernetic music interface.
Whoa!
And
on YouTube.
Yeah, he's got a bunch of older stuff. And then also my friend Chagall in the Netherlands, she uses motion capture suits and stuff like this to do like full body music control. And so that's, that seems like a pretty natural extension of, creative activity as a kind of like operatic, like a new syntax of interactions between the body and its built environment.
Yeah. It's wild shit, man.
Yeah, that's what there's Onyx. Yeah, totally. So he's like covered in this 3D printed mech suit that he wears. And I don't know how recent of a video you're going to find of his stuff, but he's very interested in this notion of like the evolution of language and like coming up with gestural interfaces that this is very much like a straight out of a DMT thing. Like when you see people in in a DMT induced state that are spontaneously gesturing and they're engaged in like glossolalia, speaking in tongues type stuff. Mm-hmm. He's basically just coming up with like the cybernetic extension to turn that kind of induced, improvised, full body gesture into something that's got like a machine translation layer in it so that other people can kind of groove on his groove. My friend the T-Fairy, who is also on the Noonautics advisory board, talks about this being, she and I have had a lot of conversations about this being the kind of the future of human language is something where we're communicating through a kind of cybernetic translation envelope to one another, but everybody's got a different layer. Like the way that we're starting to use augmented reality glasses for real-time translation, and so we're going to have before long, why would we even have languages in the way that we think of them?
Right.
Like you would have your own language and the machine would just translate it into, something that like somebody else can understand.
Universal language.
Yeah. Well, like the translation layer is universal, but your language is yours. It's like speaker base of one, that's something that, Peter Watts has written about in some of his sci-fi and Blindsight and Echopraxia.
Or what about just like telepathic communication? Like when will we be able to, like if we were able to stop using our vocal cords to talk and speak out sentences, like just thinking about things or communicating with imagery through people or like intention?
I mean, it's funny. Let's not get too far ahead of it because like I already saw that joke of like, in order to improve typing while using the Apple Vision Pro, we've created a fake iPhone keyboard that you see in AR that you can still sit there using your thumbs like you're actually holding a phone. Oh, really? And it's like, there are questions, right? Like there's, what is it, Chesterton's fence? This principle of like, don't pull up the fence until you know why the fence is there. Like there are certain things that like, it's actually probably a bad idea for us to get to the point where we're so reliant on technology that none of us speak the same language. Because as soon as that technology fails, you can't talk to each other. And so what persists into the new possibility spaces that we're creating, what is actually strongly conserved in a new evolutionary regime is a really interesting question. Like, for instance, we thought that we were going to be able to do away with the civil society, mutual aid networks, family groups, tribal affiliations, professional guilds, that somehow the state and the market and the economies of scale therein, the greater efficiency of organization at scale through states and markets was going to replace our need to like raise your kids in a village, and that has sure not proven to be true. You know, like raising your kids in a nuclear family in the suburb is terrible. You know, like you want an extended family around.
Right.
You know, and so the question is like, well, what do we think that we're getting ready to give up now? And that's why, you know, like when I was on the, you know, I have conversations with Carl Hayden Smith, who's a, you know, brilliant psychedelic philosopher who's also involved in noonautics. And Carl and I were talking about how, like, you know, with all due respect to Andrew Gallimore, like, you know, Andrew has this very sort of unrepentantly transhuman vision of our future. And Carl and I are more on the side of like hyperhuman. It's like, it's not how we replace the human with technology. It's how do we add something without losing something really crucial in the process.
Right.
You know, but that's an open question.
Well, thank you, Michael, for doing this, man. I really appreciate it.
Likewise, I love your show. I love listening. So thanks for having me on.
Tell people where they can follow your podcast, listen to your music, find your art, all that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the mother tree is just
the link tree.
The link tree right now, link tree, Michael Garfield. But yeah, the Patreon, Substack are both feeds that the podcast is there, but so is a bunch of other stuff, art and music and writing. And I'm working on 2 books, and I'm helping noonautics figure out how to raise money for their research facility. And I'm working on some AI and tech ethics stuff I'll be sharing soon. And yeah, I would love to hear from you if you find this interesting. This is a direct invitation to reach out to me. So, yeah.
Cool, man. Thanks again for your time and for blowing my mind.
Absolutely.
Good night, everybody.